45 minutes after my mother looked me in the face on my 40th birthday and told me she sometimes wished I had never been her daughter, 3 police vehicles were parked outside her house. I know because my younger sister, Emily, sent me a 12-second video from the upstairs window. Red and blue light washed over the pale siding. 2 patrol cars sat along the curb, and a 3rd vehicle had stopped behind them. My mother stood on the porch with 1 officer while my father hovered near the open front door. I could not hear everything they were saying, but I heard enough when Emily moved closer to the window. The officer asked my mother who the registered owner of the SUV was. Mom did not answer immediately. That pause told me more than anything she had said all night. Before I tell you how my birthday ended with police outside my parents' house, I hope you're doing well. Stay with me because what happened next changed how I understood my entire family. And if you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and keep listening. 4 months later, I can still remember how ordinary that Saturday had looked when it began. It was April 18th, 2026, cool enough for a light jacket but warm enough that the trees around Columbus had finally started turning green again. Brandon and I had spent part of the afternoon picking up my SUV from the garage after routine maintenance. I call it my SUV now because that distinction became ridiculous enough to require saying out loud, but there had never been any legal ambiguity. I had bought it for myself years earlier. The loan was gone, the title was clean, and my name was still on it. When my mother's old car lost its transmission almost 2 years earlier, I let her use mine because Brandon and I had another vehicle and I was not driving the SUV much. Mom was listed properly with the insurance company as a regular driver, and everyone knew she used it every day. Somewhere along the way, though, the SUV Sarah lets Mom use quietly became Mom's SUV. Brandon drove our other car home from the garage, while I took the SUV because my parents' house was on my route. Before we separated in the parking lot, he leaned against my open door and asked if I was still planning to sell it that summer. I told him yes. We had talked about simplifying a few expenses, and there was no reason for us to keep an extra vehicle indefinitely. I had already told Mom that I would need the SUV back within a few months so I could clean it up and list it. She had complained, of course, but I had expected that. One of my flaws, and I can admit it more easily now, was that I thought I understood my mother well enough to predict the limits of her behavior. I knew she could guilt trip. I knew she could exaggerate. I knew she could turn a favor into a permanent expectation. I did not think she would manufacture a situation in advance just so she could point at my reaction afterward and say, "See? I told you what she was like." My job probably contributed to that overconfidence. I was a procurement director, which meant I spent my days living inside dates, contracts, revisions, approvals, and people insisting they remembered meetings differently from everyone else. I kept scans of titles, insurance records, warranties, and major receipts in organized folders because it saved time later. Brandon liked to tease me about it. "You timestamp everything," he said that afternoon as I checked that the service receipt had been emailed correctly. I told him that 6 months after any disagreement, 5 people could remember the same conversation. 6 different ways. He laughed and said that was why he never argued with me about when the electric bill was due. At the time, it was just a normal exchange between us. By the next morning, that same habit would be the reason I noticed something my mother had probably assumed nobody would ever question. My parents lived about 25 minutes away, in a quiet suburb outside Columbus. When I pulled into their driveway that evening, I saw Emily's car already there, along with Aunt Marlene's and my cousins. Mom had told me she wanted my birthday to feel like a small family dinner, so their presence was not strange. Emily had arrived early to help prepare the food. She was 34, 6 years younger than me, and for most of our adult lives, she and I had existed in a polite middle distance. We did not openly hate each other. We also did not call each other when something went wrong. Mom had always been the bridge between us. Or at least, that was the way I understood it then. If Emily needed something, Mom told me. If Mom said Emily was upset with me, I usually accepted it. If I had a complaint about Emily, Mom was often the person who heard it first. I had begun breaking that habit earlier that year, But I had not yet realized how threatening that small change was to the person who had spent decades standing in the middle. Dinner started normally enough. Mom hugged me at the door, told me I looked tired, then immediately said she meant that with concern. Dad kissed my cheek and wished me a happy birthday. Emily handed me a glass of wine and said she hoped I had not been stuck at the garage too long. Aunt Marlene asked about work. Brandon showed up a few minutes after I did and slid into the seat beside me. There was roast chicken, potatoes, salad, and a cake waiting on the counter. Nothing about the room looked like the beginning of a disaster. That was part of what made the shift so strange. Looking back, I can see the pressure building in small remarks that I dismissed, because each one was too minor to justify a confrontation by itself. Mom mentioned that Emily had come over hours earlier to help. Then she looked at me and said, "Some people still know family matters more than schedules." I asked if that was supposed to mean something. She smiled and told me not to be sensitive on my birthday. Later, she said Brandon and I hardly visited anymore. Brandon calmly reminded her that we had been there 2 weekends earlier. She waved that away and said she was speaking generally. Dad kept eating. Aunt Marlene changed the subject to a new restaurant downtown. I noticed my cousin watching me with the careful expression people use when they think they know something you do not, but I assumed Mom had been complaining about me again. That was so common, I no longer considered it important. The cake had just been cut when Mom finally brought up the SUV. She did it so casually that for a second I almost missed the trap. I was collecting my purse from the back of the chair when she said, "Leave my keys on the counter before you go." I looked at her. "I'm driving the SUV home." Her expression changed instantly, not dramatically, just enough that I noticed it. She asked why. I reminded her that it had just come from the garage, and that Brandon and I were getting ready to sell it during the summer. We had discussed that already. Mom leaned back and gave the room a tired little smile, as though I had just demonstrated a familiar defect. Even on your birthday, everything comes back to what belongs to you. I did not raise my voice. It belongs to me because I own it. That isn't an insult. Dad murmured my name in the warning tone he used whenever he wanted me to stop before Mom became more upset. I ignored him because I was tired of conversations where stating a fact was treated as aggression. Mom said she had been driving the vehicle for almost 2 years and that everyone considered it hers. I told her everyone was free to call it whatever they wanted, but the title had never been transferred. That was when Emily spoke. She did not sound confrontational. If anything, she sounded confused. "Mom said you might take it tonight." The room seemed to tighten around that sentence. I looked at Emily first, then at my mother. "When did I say that?" Mom told me not to start. I asked again. "When did I tell you I was taking the SUV tonight?" She said I had been threatening to take it away for months. I corrected her. I had said I planned to sell it during the summer. Those were not the same thing. She told me I had been under too much stress lately and was reading hostility into everything. I remember setting my glass down carefully because I knew exactly what was happening. We had moved from a question about something she had said to a discussion about my emotional stability in less than 30 seconds. Dad tried to stop it. "Sarah, let it go, it's your birthday." I turned to him. "Then why was she telling people before I got here that I might take the car tonight?" Mom interrupted before he could answer. She said no one had been plotting against me, that she had simply warned people because I had become unpredictable whenever money or property came up. I asked her to name one unpredictable thing I had done. She started talking about the times I had refused to pay expenses for the family without documentation. I said refusing to write checks I could not verify was not instability. Emily looked between us without saying anything. Aunt Marlene stared down at her plate. That should have been the moment Mom stopped. If she had, the rest of the night might have become one more ugly family dinner we all pretended not to remember. Instead, she stared directly at me and said, "Sometimes I wish you'd never been my daughter." Nobody moved. Dad's face went slack. Emily whispered, "Mom," but Carol did not take it back. She crossed her arms as if she had finally said something she had earned the right to say. I felt the words land But I did not give her the reaction she seemed to expect. There was no screaming. I did not ask how she could say that. I did not wait for Dad to defend me. I picked up my purse and my keys. Mom said, "Don't be dramatic." I looked at her once and told her, "You don't get to say that to me and then decide how I'm allowed to leave." Brandon was already standing. He did not speak for me, and I appreciated that. We said goodbye to no one. I walked out of the house a little after 7:35, unlocked the SUV, and got behind the wheel. My hands were steady until I pulled onto the main road. Then I realized I had been gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make my fingers ache. Brandon followed in our other car. I did not know where I wanted to go yet. I only knew I was not turning around. About 10 minutes later, my phone lit up at a red light. Mom had texted, "Bring my SUV back or I'm calling the police." I read it twice because the certainty in the message almost impressed me. She was threatening to report me for stealing a vehicle whose clean title was sitting in my own records under my own name. I pulled into a well-lit gas station, parked, and opened the folder where I kept scans of major documents. There it was. My name, Nulian, new transfer. I also knew she was properly listed with my insurer as the regular driver, which meant there was no hidden insurance mess waiting to complicate the situation. Mom had permission to use my vehicle. Permission was not ownership. I texted Brandon that I was safe, then replied to Mom with 2 words. "Go ahead." I was angry when I sent it, but I was not bluffing. That distinction mattered to me. I did not want to win because Mom was afraid I might know something. I wanted her to make whatever choice she was going to make while I knew exactly where I stood. Brandon called immediately and asked if I was sure. I told him yes. He asked whether I wanted him to come back to me. I said I would meet him at home. Neither of us suggested returning to my parents' house. If police wanted to speak with me, they had my number and my address. Mom called them a couple of minutes later. I did not know exactly what she said until I saw the incident documentation days afterward and heard pieces from Emily. But she described a heated family dispute and a possible vehicle theft. She said I had left angry in the SUV she used and that she did not know whether I might come back. That last part was enough to make the situation sound more volatile than it actually was. I had no intention of returning. I was already driving away from the entire mess. The video from Emily arrived roughly 45 minutes after Mom had told me she wished I had never been her daughter. I was home by then, sitting at the kitchen table with Brandon. The clip showed 2 patrol cars and a supervisor vehicle outside my parents' house. Mom stood on the porch speaking with an officer. I turned up the volume. At first, all I heard was traffic and Emily's breathing from behind the phone. Then the officer asked, "Who is the registered owner of the vehicle?" Mom paused. I watched the clip again. That pause was the first moment I felt something besides anger. An officer called me later that evening. His tone was calm, not accusatory. He confirmed my name, asked about the vehicle, and asked whether I had ever transferred ownership to Carol Donovan. I said no. I told him I had bought the SUV, still held the title, and had allowed my mother to use it after her previous vehicle failed. He asked whether I intended to return to my parents' house that night. I said absolutely not. He did not tell me my mother had committed a crime. He did not declare me victorious. He simply said there was no reason for me to come back that evening and that they were documenting the incident. That was enough. What I learned afterward was that the conversation on my parents' porch had changed the moment the officers checked the registration. Mom had started with, "my SUV." Then, when asked whether her name was on the title, she had shifted to, "Sarah bought it for me." Those were very different statements. Dad had been standing close enough to hear the change. So had Emily. Nobody was arrested, and I did not want anyone arrested. But for once, Mom had been forced to answer questions from people who did not care that she was upset, did not know how I supposedly always was, and could not be redirected with a story about my personality. They wanted dates, ownership, permission, and facts. I thought that was the end of the night. I thought Mom had overplayed her hand because she was angry, called the police without thinking it through, and embarrassed herself. I was still sitting at the kitchen table when another message from Emily appeared. It said, "Mom told us you might do this before you even got here." I stared at the words long enough for Brandon to ask what was wrong. Before I could answer him, Emily sent another message. "There's a group chat. You need to see the timestamp." That was the moment my birthday stopped looking like a family argument that had gotten out of control. For the first time, I wondered whether it had been designed to go wrong from the beginning. The next morning, I woke before my alarm with the strange certainty that something was waiting for me. Brandon was still asleep beside me, and for a few seconds I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to decide whether the night before had actually been as ugly as I remembered. Then I reached for my phone. Emily had sent 3 screenshots after midnight. The first was from a group chat I had never known existed. Mom, Dad, Emily, Aunt Marlene, and my cousin Daniel were all in it. The message that made me sit upright had been sent at 5:58 the previous evening, more than an hour before I arrived at my parents' house. Mom had written, "Sarah may try to take my SUV tonight. If she causes a scene, don't argue with her. She's been under a lot of stress lately." I read the timestamp again, then the sentence, then the timestamp a third time. There was no ambiguity to hide behind. At 5:58, I had still been dealing with the garage. I had not decided to take the SUV away from Mom that night. I had not threatened her. I had not even spoken to her yet. I got out of bed, carried my phone downstairs, and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. That was instinct more than strategy. At work, when a supplier claimed one thing and an email chain showed another, I did not begin by deciding who was lying. I rebuilt the order of events: dates first, claims second, motives last. I made a simple list. At 5:58, Mom warned everyone I might take the SUV. A little after 7, I arrived. Around 7:30, she told me to leave her keys. Emily revealed what Mom had already told everyone. Mom said she wished I had never been her daughter. At about 7:37, I left. At 7:45, she demanded the SUV back. A few minutes later, she called the police. I sat back and looked at the page. The interesting part was not that Mom had predicted the outcome. It was that she had created the exact pressure point that could make her prediction come true. Brandon came downstairs while I was still staring at the chronology. I handed him the screenshot without explaining what bothered me. He read it once and frowned. "How did she know what you were going to do?" he asked. I told him she did not. That was the first conclusion I trusted. "She knew what she was going to push," I said. Brandon pulled out the chair beside me. We went through the dinner again, this time paying attention to what Mom had controlled. She knew I was arriving in the SUV, because I had told her about the service appointment. She knew I had discussed selling it that summer. She knew the keys would be with me. Then, before I arrived, she told the rest of the family I might take the vehicle that very night. Once I was there, she turned ownership into a public challenge and ordered me to leave the keys. If I surrendered them, she kept the SUV and gained another example of me backing down. If I argued, I looked materialistic. If I drove away, I became exactly the daughter she had warned everyone about. That realization did not make me feel clever. It made me feel cold. I opened my text thread with Mom and searched backward through March and early April. Nothing looked dramatic by itself. That was what bothered me. On March 27th, she had asked, "When are you taking the SUV in for that service?" A week later, "Are you still serious about selling it this summer?" Then, 4 days before my birthday, "Will Brandon be coming separately Saturday?" I had answered yes, because I assumed she was planning dinner logistics. 2 days later, she had asked whether I would be driving the SUV over after the garage. I had written, "Probably. It's on the way." At the time, those were ordinary questions. In sequence, they looked different. None of them proved she had planned a confrontation, but they proved she had known exactly what conditions would be in place. I did not call Mom. That restraint cost me more than I want to admit. Part of me wanted to read the timestamp to her and listen to her explain why she had warned 5 people about an action I had never announced. Another part of me wanted to ask Dad why he had sat at that table acting surprised. Instead, I called Emily. She answered on the 4th ring and sounded like she had not slept much either. I asked her to send the full group chat, not selected screenshots. She hesitated. I could hear movement in the background and then a door closing. "I will," she said. "But before you decide I helped her set this up, I didn't know she was going to call the police." I told her I had not asked about the police. She went quiet, and that silence immediately put me on guard. I asked when Mom first started talking about me taking the SUV. Emily said about a week before my birthday. Mom had told her I was getting weird about ownership, and that I was angry because everyone treated the SUV like it belonged to Mom. I asked whether Emily had ever heard me say I planned to take it that Saturday. "No," she admitted. "But Mom made it sound like you'd been threatening it." I asked why she believed her. Emily's answer was not flattering to either of us. "Because you have been angry about money before," I almost laughed. Instead, I reminded her that refusing to pay undocumented family expenses was not the same thing as threatening to repossess a vehicle at a birthday dinner. She said she knew that now. Then she added, "You're acting like I had no reason to believe Mom. You don't know everything you've said about us either." That line annoyed me enough that I nearly ended the call. I asked what exactly she thought I had said. Emily brought up a message from January, one I had sent privately after Mom asked me to cover another family expense without explaining what it was for. I had written that I was done paying bills when nobody would give me basic information. Emily said Mom had shown her the message. I stopped her. I had never sent that text to Mom. I had sent it to Emily after she asked why I seemed irritated. There was a pause long enough for me to understand before she admitted it. Emily had forwarded my private message to Mom. I was furious, but not surprised, and that bothered me more. Emily told me Mom had called asking what I was saying about the family. Emily had sent the screenshot because she thought I was accusing Mom of mishandling money. "You could have asked me," I said. She immediately shot back. "You could have asked me about a lot of things too." That sounded defensive, but it landed because it was true. I had spent years assuming Emily was irresponsible because Mom said she was. I had assumed she expected everyone to rescue her because Mom constantly complained about how much help Emily needed. Earlier that year, Mom had told me Emily refused to contribute toward an expense for Dad. For once, I had called Emily directly. She had been confused because nobody had asked her for money. That had been the first small crack in the system, though I had not understood it at the time. I asked Emily whether Mom knew we had spoken directly about that January expense. Emily said yes. I remembered exactly how strange Mom had been afterward. She had laughed and said, "Well, look at you two finally comparing notes." But there had been an edge to it. At the time, I thought she was being sarcastic. Now I wondered whether that phone call between sisters had frightened her more than any argument about money ever could. I still did not trust Emily completely. She had forwarded something private. She had sat through my birthday, knowing Mom had warned everyone I might cause a scene. She had benefited for years from being the easier daughter while I carried the label of difficult one. But those facts did not prove she had helped design the birthday confrontation. After we hung up, Emily sent more screenshots. The chat had started innocently several days before my birthday, with Mom discussing food, cake, and arrival times. Then the tone shifted. She wrote that I had been under pressure at work. She said I was fixated on the car lately. She told everyone not to take it personally if I became argumentative. Dad responded only once near the beginning with a thumbs up. Aunt Marlene wrote, "Maybe don't bring up the SUV at her birthday." Mom replied, "I'm not planning to. I'm just preparing everyone." That line stayed with me because Mom had been the person who brought it up. She had not merely predicted conflict. She had told everyone she would avoid the trigger, then introduced it herself. I saved the screenshots in a folder with the date and did something that would have driven my mother crazy if she had known. I did nothing else. I did not confront Aunt Marlene. I did not call Dad. I did not start a family thread demanding explanations. I requested the police incident documentation through the department's normal process and went to work Monday morning. That was not because I had suddenly become detached. I spent half that day replaying the group chat in my head. But I knew the difference between suspicion and something I could actually establish. I had Mom's pre-event messages. I had the ownership documents. I still did not know exactly what she had told police, and I did not want to build my next conclusion on Emily's memory of a conversation she had heard from inside the house. The incident summary arrived a couple of days later. It was far less dramatic than the story Mom had already begun telling people. The report described a family dispute involving a vehicle, a caller who stated that her adult daughter had left angry in an SUV the caller regularly used, and a concern that the daughter might return. It noted that a registration check identified me as the registered owner and that no arrest had been made. There was no line saying police had confirmed Mom's SUV had been stolen. There was no line saying I had threatened her. There was no heroic conclusion in my favor, either. It was exactly what a report like that should have been. Facts, statements, and what officers did with them. One detail bothered me more than the rest. Mom had referred to the SUV as my vehicle when she called. Later, after officers checked the registration, her explanation shifted. She told them I had purchased it for her. That wording mattered because it was close enough to the truth to sound reasonable while changing the legal and practical reality. I had purchased the vehicle. She had been allowed to use it. I had never signed it over. That was the pattern I was beginning to notice in everything Mom said. She rarely invented a whole event. She took one real fact and moved its meaning 2 inches to the side, just enough that anyone hearing only her version reached the conclusion she wanted. By Wednesday evening, I had not spoken to her since the birthday. That changed when my phone rang while Brandon and I were clearing dinner dishes. I almost let it go to voicemail, then answered because I wanted to hear what she would say when she had no audience. She started with outrage, not apology. She said I had humiliated her in front of 3 police vehicles, terrified Dad, upset Emily, and turned a family disagreement into something ugly. I reminded her that she had called the police. She said she would not have needed to if I had simply returned her SUV. I told her again that it was not hers. She gave a tired sigh and said, "There you go again. Everything has to become a technicality with you." I could have argued ownership for the 100th time. Instead, I asked the question that mattered. Why did you tell everyone I would take it before I arrived? She answered too quickly. Because I know you. I asked how knowing me explained the exact timing. She said I had been talking about selling the vehicle for months. I said I had never told her I would take it on my birthday. She accused me of twisting words. I reminded her that she had specifically written, "She may try to take my SUV tonight." There was a pause. Then Mom said, "You clearly have Emily feeding you things she shouldn't be." That response told me she knew exactly which message I meant. I asked whether Emily had helped her plan the birthday confrontation. Mom laughed, but there was nothing amused about it. "You always do this," she said. "You turn on everyone the second they stop telling you what you want to hear." I told her I had asked a simple question. She said Emily was not nearly as innocent as I seemed to think. I reminded her I had never said Emily was innocent. Mom lowered her voice, becoming almost gentle. "Then ask your sister why she sent me your private message in the first place." She hung up before I could answer. I stood in the kitchen with the phone still against my ear while Brandon watched me from across the counter. I already knew Emily had forwarded one message. What I did not know was why Mom had chosen that fact now, at exactly the moment I was asking about the birthday plan. It could have been another diversion. It could also have been proof that Emily had been feeding Mom more information than she admitted. I had spent 2 days thinking the timestamp exposed my mother's plan. By Wednesday night, I was beginning to wonder whether the person who handed me the evidence had helped create the situation I was trying to understand. The next morning, I called Emily before I could talk myself out of it. I did not start with Mom's accusation. I started with the one thing I could verify. "Why did you send her my message in January?" There was a long pause, but this time Emily did not pretend she did not know which message I meant. She said Mom had called her after I refused to cover another family expense without seeing what it was for. According to Emily, Mom had been crying and asking whether I had said anything else about her. Emily had felt caught in the middle, which would have been ironic if it had not been so familiar. She said she forwarded my text because she thought I was accusing Mom of mishandling money and because she wanted to prove she was not hiding anything from her. I listened until she was finished, then told her the part she seemed to be avoiding. That message was private, Emily said she knew, and I shouldn't have sent it. There was no excuse attached to the sentence, which was more than I expected. I asked whether that was the only private message of mine she had ever forwarded to Mom. Emily hesitated just long enough to make me suspicious again, then said she honestly could not remember every screenshot or copied sentence over the years. That answer made my jaw tighten. I told her that, "I don't remember," was convenient. She snapped back that I was not exactly innocent when it came to talking about her through Mom. "How many times did Mom tell you I was selfish and you never called me?" she asked. I said that was different. Emily immediately asked why. I opened my mouth and realized I did not have a good answer. It felt different, because I had been on the side I considered rational. That was not the same thing as actually being different. Emily reminded me about the expense in January, the one that had started changing things between us. Mom had called me saying Dad needed help covering a payment and that Emily had refused to contribute. She had said it in that weary voice she used whenever she wanted me to hear more than the words themselves. "Your sister says she can't help." Again. A year earlier, I would have accepted that. It fit the version of Emily I had carried around for years. Impulsive, protected, always expecting someone else to fix things. But in January, I had been tired of being told what everyone else supposedly thought or refused to do, so I had called Emily directly. She had sounded genuinely confused. Nobody had asked her for money. She did not even know Dad had a payment due. I remembered the exact silence after she said that. It had been the first time I wondered whether Mom's version was not merely biased, but constructed. I asked Emily whether she remembered what happened after that call. She did. We had both confronted Mom separately, and Mom had laughed it off. She told me there must have been a misunderstanding. She told Emily she was glad we were finally communicating like sisters. At the time, I assumed she was covering embarrassment. Emily now told me Mom had been strange with her for days afterward, asking what else we had discussed and whether I had said anything about family finances. That detail tightened something in my stomach. The first time Emily and I bypassed Mom as a messenger, Mom had immediately wanted to know what information had passed between us. I asked Emily to go through 3 incidents with me, not because I wanted to build a case yet, but because I wanted to know whether our memories matched anything outside Mom's version. We started with Thanksgiving the previous November. I had not gone to my parents' house. For months afterward, I had carried the story everyone seemed to accept. I had chosen not to come because I was too busy and too annoyed with the family. Emily remembered being angry with me that day because Mom had told her I couldn't be bothered. I pulled up the text thread I had already found. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Mom had written, "Don't worry about coming. We're keeping it small this year." I had answered, "Okay. Hope you all have a good day." Emily went quiet when I read it aloud. She said Mom had never told her that. The second incident was older, from August 2024, when Emily moved apartments. I remembered Mom telling me Emily already had enough help and did not need me there. I had been relieved because I had a work deadline and assumed Emily preferred having friends around anyway. Emily's memory was completely different. She had spent moving day irritated that I had not shown up. Mom had told her I was too busy as usual. I found the message Mom sent me the week of the move. "Emily already has enough people. Don't worry about coming." I sent Emily a screenshot while we were still on the phone. She stared at it for nearly a minute before saying, "She told me you said no." That was not a misunderstanding about tone. Those were 2 incompatible versions of the same event. The third was from February 2025. Dad had paid several late fees on a household account, and Mom complained to me about it. I had written, "Dad needs to stop paying late fees." This is money being thrown away. Months later, Dad had been colder with me than usual. Mom eventually told me he was hurt because I had called him irresponsible with money. At the time, I assumed she had summarized my frustration poorly. Now I read the old text again. I had criticized a behavior, not his character. Emily said she remembered Mom using almost the exact phrase, "Sarah thinks Dad is irresponsible." That was the pattern beginning to take shape. Mom did not need to invent an event. She took a sentence, moved its meaning slightly, and handed the altered version to someone who already had a reason to believe it. Emily sounded shaken, but I did not let that turn her into an innocent victim in my head. She had still forwarded my private message. She had still believed things about me because believing them made her position in the family easier. I told her that directly. She did not argue. "I know," she said. Then she added something that surprised me. "Mom lied to me." But I believed her, because being the good daughter felt better than asking whether you were actually the bad one. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. That was the first honest sentence either of us had said about our roles in years. I could have taken the moral high ground. I wanted to. Instead, I heard myself say, "And I believed you were spoiled because it made walking away easier." Emily did not answer right away. The truth was uncomfortable because Mom had not created everything from nothing. She had used material we gave her. Emily liked being protected. I liked believing I was above the chaos. She accepted the role of easier daughter, and I accepted the role of the one who did not need anyone. Neither of us had asked enough questions when those roles became useful explanations for why we were no longer close. That did not suddenly make us sisters again in the sentimental sense. We were not crying on the phone or making plans for brunch. If anything, the conversation became more careful because neither of us could rely on the old shorthand anymore. Emily admitted she had resented me for years over things she now realized might not have happened the way she thought. I admitted the same. We agreed on one rule, simple enough that it embarrassed me we had never used it before. If Mom said, "Sarah said this," Emily would ask me. If Mom said, "Emily thinks that," I would ask Emily. No more accepting translated versions of each other. Emily then sent me the full screenshots from the birthday group chat. This time I could see the sequence instead of the selected messages she had sent the night before. It began with food and arrival times. Mom asked Daniel whether he wanted chocolate or vanilla cake. Aunt Marlene offered to bring wine. Dad sent a joke about turning 40. Then, 3 days before my birthday, Mom shifted the subject. She wrote that I had been tense lately. A day later, she said I was fixated on getting the SUV back. Emily had responded with a question mark and asked whether I had said I was taking it that weekend. Mom answered, "Not directly, but I know Sarah." That sentence bothered me because it gave her complete freedom. She did not need evidence if she claimed prediction as maternal intuition. Aunt Marlene had actually pushed back. "Maybe don't bring up the SUV at her birthday," she wrote. Mom replied, "I'm not planning to. I just want everyone prepared in case Sarah starts something." I read that exchange 3 times. Then I got to the message from Dad. It was short enough that I almost skipped over it. After Mom wrote that perhaps the family needed to let me see how her behavior affects everyone, Dad had replied, "Maybe this will finally get through to her." I felt the betrayal differently than I had felt Mom's. With her, I had already expected manipulation once the timestamp appeared. Dad's message was quieter, which made it harder to dismiss. He had sat at the table that night looking uncomfortable when Mom brought up the SUV. He had told me to let it go. He had acted like the argument had erupted on its own, but the message showed he knew there was supposed to be some kind of lesson. I called Emily back and asked what Dad knew. She said she was not sure. Mom had framed the whole thing as a family conversation. According to Emily, Mom said I had become too transactional and that someone needed to make me understand how cold I was becoming. Emily admitted she had not thought much of it, because Mom often talked about getting everyone together to clear the air. "Did you know she was going to bring up the SUV?" I asked. Emily said Mom had told them she specifically would not. That answer mattered. It meant Mom had reassured the group she would avoid the very subject she later introduced herself. I asked whether Emily knew Mom planned to tell me she wished I had never been her daughter. Emily almost sounded offended. Of course not. I asked about the police. She said no again, more sharply this time. She told me what happened after I left. Mom stood in the kitchen, furious that I had driven away. Dad told her not to call anyone. Mom said I had stolen her car in front of the whole family, and that if she let me get away with it, I would keep doing whatever I wanted. Emily said she tried to remind Mom that the vehicle was in my name. Mom snapped that registration was a technicality and that everyone knew the SUV was hers. Then she made the call. I believed most of Emily's account because it fit what the incident report said, but I was careful not to treat it as omniscient truth. Emily had been in the room. She was telling me what she remembered. That distinction had become important to me. For the first time, I was separating what someone said happened from what I could independently verify. Later that afternoon, Brandon found me at the dining table with my laptop open and printed screenshots spread beside it. He did not ask whether I was building a case. He asked how the conversation with Emily went. I told him the uncomfortable truth. Better than expected, worse than I wanted. He read Dad's message and sat down across from me. That one hurts more, he said. I did not ask how he knew. My face probably made it obvious. For years, Dad had been the person I considered neutral. He rarely started conflict. He rarely said cruel things. Whenever Mom and I clashed, he presented himself as the exhausted man caught between two difficult women. That image had protected him. If he was merely tired of the fighting, then his silence looked reasonable. But maybe this will finally get through to her. Was not neutral. He had accepted the idea that my birthday could be used as a correction. Brandon asked what I was going to do. I told him I was going to ask Dad directly. He nodded, then hesitated. Before you do, decide what answer you're actually looking for. I asked what he meant. He said there was a difference between proving Dad knew every detail and finding out whether he knew enough that he should have called me. I hated that distinction, because I already suspected the second question was the one that mattered. I waited until evening. Dad usually answered after dinner, once Mom settled in front of the television. When he picked up, his voice was cautious. He said he had been meaning to call me. I told him that was convenient because I had a question. He started to apologize for how birthday dinner ended, but I stopped him before he could turn the conversation into a general expression of regret. I asked whether he knew Mom had told people I might take the SUV before I arrived. Dad exhaled slowly. Your mother was worried you might. That isn't what I asked. I know. Did you know she told them that? He was quiet for several seconds. Yes. The answer was so simple that for a moment I had nothing to do with it. I asked whether he knew Mom intended to confront me about the vehicle. He said he knew she wanted everyone to have a conversation about how distant I had become and how I was treating the family. I asked what that had to do with the SUV. He said the car had become a symbol of the larger problem. I almost laughed at that. The SUV had become a symbol because Mom needed it to be one, legally and practically. It was a vehicle I owned and had temporarily allowed her to use. Emotionally, she had transformed my decision to sell my own property into evidence that I was abandoning the family. I asked Dad whether he knew she planned to provoke me. He immediately said no. I believed that part, or at least I had no evidence to contradict it. He said Mom told him the dinner would be a chance to talk calmly and that she wanted everyone present so I could understand they were concerned. I asked whether he knew about the group chat. He said yes. I asked why he never contacted me directly. I didn't want another fight, he said. I stared at the wall across from me. So you let me walk into one. That's not fair. Then explain the fair version. Dad said he thought Mom would talk, I would get annoyed, everyone would say their piece, and things might finally improve. He told me he never imagined she would say she wished I had never been born or call the police. I said those were not the only things that mattered. You knew she was preparing everyone for me to behave badly before I even got there. He told me Mom had been worried. I asked again why he did not call me. He gave the same answer with different words. He did not want to escalate things. He did not want to upset Mom. He thought if he stayed out of it, the situation would settle down. That was the moment something shifted in how I saw him. Dad had spent years telling himself he stayed out of conflict. What he actually did was refuse to intervene when intervention might have cost him peace at home. His silence was not neutral simply because it was quiet. Every time Mom spoke for someone else and he knew enough to question it, choosing not to question it protected her version. I asked him one final thing. When Mom told everyone I might take the SUV, did you believe her? He sighed. I thought it was possible. Why? Because you'd been talking about selling it. That was months away. I know. And I never said I was taking it that night. I know. Hearing him say it stripped away the last excuse. Dad had known the prediction was not based on something I had actually said. He had still accepted it, because Mom's interpretation was easier than challenging her. Before we ended the call, he said there was something he should send me. A minute later, a screenshot arrived from his private text thread with Mom. It had been sent on the afternoon of my birthday. Mom wrote, "If Sarah takes the car, don't chase her. Let everyone see what she's willing to do." Dad had not replied. He had not objected either. I looked at the sentence until the letters blurred. Mom had not merely feared that I might take the SUV. She had already decided what that action would mean. She wanted an audience. If I left with my own vehicle, I would become the demonstration. Dad said quietly through the phone, "I should have called you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." I did not tell him it was okay, because it was not. I did not tell him I was done with him forever, because I did not know that either. I told him I needed time, and for once he did not ask me to think about what my distance would do to Mom. He just said he understood. That night I opened a new folder on my laptop. I did not call it Mom or Evidence. I called it Timeline. I put the birthday screenshots in one section, the incident report in another, and the 3 older conversations Emily and I had already compared beneath them. Thanksgiving 2025. Emily's move in August 2024. Dad's late fees in February 2025. 3 events did not prove that every conflict in my family had been manufactured. I was not interested in convincing myself of that. What they did prove was more unsettling. Mom had changed context more than once, and the people around her had accepted the changed version because it arrived first. I started scrolling through older messages, not looking for anything dramatic, just checking whether what I remembered matched what had actually been written. Less than 20 minutes later, I found the Thanksgiving text again. "Don't worry about coming, we're keeping it small." I remembered Aunt Marlene's disappointed face the next time I saw her. I remembered Emily mentioning how strange it had been that I skipped Thanksgiving without calling. I remembered Dad telling me in December that I should make more of an effort with the family. For 5 months, I had carried that event as evidence that everyone had wanted me there, and I had chosen distance. Now I was looking at a message telling me not to come. For the first time, I stopped asking whether Mom had planned my birthday. A larger question had taken its place. How many times had I walked away from someone because my mother had already told me they had walked away from me first? I did not sleep much that night. The Thanksgiving message sat in my head like a splinter, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so ordinary. "Don't worry about coming, we're keeping it small." There was nothing vicious in the wording. No insult. No threat. If I had shown that text to anyone at the time, they would have seen a mother telling her daughter not to make the trip. But somewhere between that message and the next family gathering, the story had changed into, "Sarah chose not to come." I had accepted that version because I had not thought there was anything to check. By morning, I understood why Dad's admission bothered me more than Mom's original lie. Mom had always been forceful enough that I knew when she wanted a certain version of an event to win. Dad was different. He had built his entire identity around being the reasonable one, the person who hated conflict and never wanted to take sides. Growing up, I had interpreted that as fairness. As an adult, I had interpreted it as exhaustion. Now I was beginning to understand that neutrality was not what he had been practicing. He had been making choices. He had simply chosen silence often enough that the choices became invisible. I opened my laptop before work and looked again at the screenshot Dad had sent me the night before. Mom's message was still there. If Sarah takes the car, don't chase her. Let everyone see what she's willing to do. Dad had not answered it, but he had seen it. That mattered. He knew before I arrived that Mom was already assigning moral meaning to an action I had not taken. He knew she wanted witnesses. He knew the dinner was not simply dinner. Maybe he did not know she would tell me she wished I had never been born. Maybe he did not know she would call the police. I believed him on those points. But the part he did know was enough. Brandon found me at the kitchen counter with my coffee going cold. He asked whether I was working early, and I told him I was trying to understand how much Dad had known before the birthday. Brandon did not immediately say anything. He poured coffee, sat across from me, and waited. I appreciated that more than advice. I told him I kept wanting to separate Dad from Mom because Dad had never been as cruel. Brandon said, "Cruel and passive aren't the same thing." I nodded, but I was not ready to let him finish the thought for me. I had defended Dad for years using the same sentence. He hates conflict. When Mom told me Dad was upset with something I had said, I rarely called him directly because I assumed he would not want to discuss it. When Dad called to tell me I should apologize to Mom, he usually sounded tired enough that I ended the conversation quickly. I told myself I was sparing him. Looking back, that arrangement benefited him perfectly. Mom translated his feelings for him, and he translated her demands for her. Neither of them had to stand alone in front of me and say exactly what they believed. I asked Brandon whether he thought Dad was as responsible as Mom. He shook his head. That's not a useful question. I frowned because it sounded evasive. He explained that Mom had acted, planned, pushed, and lied by omission. Dad had not done all of that. But if I turned the issue into a competition over who was worse, I would give Dad an easy escape. He could always say he was not Carol. He could always point to the fact that he had not called the police. The better question was whether he had known something was wrong and chosen his own comfort anyway. That irritated me because it was exactly the kind of distinction I made at work. A vendor did not have to be the person who falsified a number to be responsible for approving it without asking why it had changed. Intent mattered, but so did process. I had spent years holding people professionally accountable for failures that looked smaller than Dad's silence, yet in my family I had treated silence like weather. Something that happened. Something nobody caused. I went to work and tried to stay inside my normal life. I had supplier calls, a contract review, and a meeting about a delayed shipment. For several hours, I succeeded. Then one of my managers said during a meeting, "That isn't what I was told." And the phrase hit me so hard I lost the next 30 seconds of the conversation. I asked her to repeat herself, then forced myself back into the room. It was becoming impossible not to notice how often family conflict had depended on exactly that sentence. At lunch, I checked my phone and saw a missed call from Dad. There was no voicemail. A few minutes later, he texted, "I know you're upset. I'd like to explain more when you have time." I stared at it longer than necessary. The old version of me would have either ignored him for days or called immediately while I was still angry. Both reactions would have let the conversation become emotional before it became precise. I wrote back that I could meet him after work the next day at a coffee shop halfway between our houses. I chose a public place, not because I thought Dad would cause a scene, but because I did not want Mom walking into the room halfway through the conversation. Dad arrived early. He had a coffee in front of him and looked older than he had on my birthday, although I knew that was probably my perception rather than any change in him. He stood when I approached and seemed unsure whether to hug me. I sat before he had to decide. For the first few minutes, he tried to talk around the issue. He said Mom had been devastated by how everything turned out. He said Emily was upset. He said the family was falling apart over something that had started with a car. I stopped him there. "It didn't start with a car," I said. "The car was the thing she used." Dad rubbed both hands over his cup. "I understand why you feel that way." I told him I did not want him to understand how I felt. I wanted him to tell me what he knew. That distinction seemed to make him uncomfortable, but he nodded. I asked when Mom first told him she wanted my birthday to become some kind of family conversation. He said about a week before. She had told him I was becoming distant, that I had been difficult about money, and that taking the SUV away would leave her in a bad position. Dad said he told her he did not want an argument at my birthday dinner. Mom assured him there would not be one if I stayed calm. That phrase caught my attention. If I stayed calm? Dad realized what he had said. He looked down. That's how she put it. So before I even got there, the success of the dinner depended on my behavior. I didn't think of it like that. That doesn't mean it wasn't. He did not argue. I asked whether he knew Mom had told the group I might take the SUV that night. He had already admitted he did, but I wanted the sequence from his own mouth. He said yes. I asked whether he ever heard me say I planned to do that. He said no. I asked whether he thought it was possible anyway. He said yes, because I had been talking about selling the SUV. I reminded him that selling something in the summer was not the same as taking it that Saturday night. He agreed. Every answer seemed to narrow the space he had left for himself. Then I asked the question I had not asked clearly enough the first time. When Mom said, "Let everyone see what she's willing to do," what did you think she meant? Dad leaned back and sighed. I thought she meant if you chose to take the car, everyone would see why she was upset. That's a lesson, I guess. No, you knew it was a lesson. He looked irritated then, not angry exactly, but defensive. Sarah, I was trying to keep things from blowing up. You were sitting in a group chat where Mom was predicting my reaction before I arrived. I didn't write those messages. You didn't correct them either. He said nothing. That silence was different from the ones I remembered from childhood. Back then, silence had felt like calm. Now it felt like participation without fingerprints. I told him I needed to understand something else. How many times have you let Mom tell me what you think instead of telling me yourself? He looked startled, as if I had changed the subject. I gave him one example. The late fee incident from February 2025. Mom told me Dad was deeply hurt because I had called him irresponsible with money. I asked whether he remembered that. He did. Did you ever see what I actually wrote? No. Did you ask? No. Did you call me? No. I told him the actual message. Dad needs to stop paying late fees. This is money being thrown away. His expression changed slightly. That's not what your mother told me, he said. I know. He stared at the table. For once, I let the silence sit there instead of rescuing him from it. Dad said Mom had told him I thought he could not manage money and that I was tired of cleaning up after him. I asked whether that sounded like something I would say. He hesitated. At the time, I was angry. That answer almost made me laugh because it was exactly the mechanism Mom depended on. If someone was already hurt, the least charitable interpretation became the easiest one to believe. I asked him why he never came to me directly. He said he did not want another fight. I told him that answer was starting to sound less like a reason and more like a policy. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw embarrassment rather than defensiveness. You're probably right, he said. Your mother would tell me something you said, I'd get upset, and then I'd think calling you would make it worse. And what did not calling me do? He did not answer. I answered for him. It let her version become the only one. Dad looked toward the window. Cars moved through the parking lot outside. Nobody around us knew that a family structure I had accepted for most of my life was being reduced to a series of embarrassingly simple choices. One person said something. Another person did not verify it. Resentment filled the space. I did not want the conversation to become a trial of every year of my childhood, so I kept it narrow. I asked about Thanksgiving 2025. Mom had told me not to come because they were keeping it small. Dad remembered the dinner. Aunt Marlene, Daniel, Emily, and 2 family friends had been there. It had not been especially small. What did Mom tell you about me not coming? Dad said she told him I had decided not to come because I wanted a quiet holiday with Brandon. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, but I stayed focused. Did that bother you? Yes. Did you call me? No. Did you ask me why? No. Then in December you told me I needed to make more of an effort with the family. Dad closed his eyes briefly. I remember. I pulled out my phone and showed him Mom's text. He read it twice. His shoulders dropped. I never saw that. I know. That was the point. He had never seen it because he never asked. I could have kept going. I had Emily's move in 2024. I had other little moments I was beginning to question. But I stopped. I did not want to overwhelm him with a history I had not fully verified myself. 3 clear examples were more useful than 20 suspicions. Dad asked whether I believed Mom had been deliberately trying to turn everyone against me for years. I told him I did not know yet. I was trying not to make the same mistake she made, turning interpretation into fact before I had enough evidence. What I knew was that she had repeatedly translated conversations in ways that damaged relationships, and people, including me, had accepted those translations without checking. He nodded slowly. Your mother has always tried to smooth things over. I looked at him. Does this look smooth to you? He gave a weak smile, then let it disappear. That was the first moment I thought he might actually understand something, rather than simply want the conversation to end. When we left the coffee shop, Dad asked if I wanted him to tell Mom we had met. I almost said yes out of habit, then stopped. That's up to you, I said, but don't tell her what I think. If she wants to know what I think, she can ask me. He nodded. That was the first small boundary I set with him that was not about money, time, or physical distance. It was about information. Brandon was making dinner when I got home. I told him Dad had admitted more than I expected. Brandon asked whether I felt better. I said no. Then I thought about it and said, maybe clearer. Better would have meant Dad had been ignorant. Clearer meant he had been avoidant on purpose, even if he had convinced himself it was kindness. Brandon said something then that irritated me because it touched an old argument. This is what I meant when I told you your mother always seemed to know what everyone was supposedly feeling. I stiffened. I know. He heard the warning in my voice and stopped. That should have ended it, but I was tired and defensive. I said, it's easy for you. She isn't your mother. The sentence came out sharper than I intended. Brandon put the knife down and looked at me. I know she isn't. I immediately regretted the tone, but he continued before I could apologize. I never said it was easy. I said I could see what she did to you from the outside. You had to decide what it meant from the inside. That shut me up. He was right, but not in the way I first thought. Brandon had seen Mom's behavior earlier because he did not carry 40 years of context around it. He did not remember her sitting beside my bed when I was sick as a kid. He did not remember family vacations, school events, all the ordinary years where she had been my mother before I had words like triangulation or narrative control. I had information he did not have, but that did not mean my interpretation was automatically better. Sometimes familiarity did not make a pattern clearer. Sometimes it made it harder to see. I apologized for snapping at him. He shrugged it off, but I did not. One of the habits I was beginning to notice in myself was how quickly I rejected observations that threatened the model I had already built. Emily was irresponsible. Dad was passive. Mom was controlling but predictable. Brandon did not understand because he was an outsider. Those categories had made family life easier to navigate, but they had also made me lazy. Once I decided who someone was, I stopped checking whether new facts still fit. That evening, I went back through my old messages, but I changed the way I searched. I did not type Mom's name and look for proof she had lied. That would have been too easy and probably dishonest. I chose specific events I remembered clearly, then looked for the actual communications around them. Thanksgiving 2025. Emily's move in August 2024. Dad's late fees in February 2025. I wrote down what I had believed happened, what Mom had told me, and what the texts actually showed. The differences were rarely enormous. That was what made them effective. Emily already has enough people. Became, Sarah was too busy to help. Dad needs to stop paying late fees. Became, Sarah thinks Dad is irresponsible. We're keeping Thanksgiving small. Became, Sarah didn't want to come. Each version contained enough truth to survive casual inspection. Emily did move without me. Dad did pay late fees. I did miss Thanksgiving. If anyone challenged Mom, she could point to the event and say she had only summarized it. The more I looked, the less interested I became in proving intent. Intent was slippery. Pattern was not. I called Emily the next afternoon and asked whether she still had texts from her move in 2024. She did. I asked her not to send me everything at once, only the messages that directly referenced whether I was coming. 10 minutes later, she sent a screenshot from Mom that said, "Sarah can't make it. Work again." Emily had replied with a thumbs up, and then later, figures. I still had Mom's message to me from that same week. "Emily already has enough people. Don't worry about coming." I stared at the two screenshots side by side. There was no misunderstanding there. Mom had told me I was not needed, and told Emily I had refused. I called Emily back. She sounded more angry than surprised. "I was mad at you for months over that. I thought you didn't want me there." I did. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then Emily asked, "Why would she do that?" I almost answered immediately. Because she wanted control. Because she needed to stay in the middle. Because keeping us apart made her important. All of those theories were starting to feel plausible. But they were still theories. "I don't know," I said. "Not yet." That answer mattered to me. A week earlier, I would have filled the silence with certainty. I was learning to leave space between what I could prove and what I suspected. Emily told me she had started going through her own messages. I warned her not to confront Mom yet. She asked why, and I told her because once Mom knew exactly what we were comparing, people might stop sharing things. Emily laughed without humor. "So now we're investigating our mother." "No," I said. "We're checking whether things happened the way we were told they happened." The distinction felt important, even if the result might eventually be the same. That night, Dad called again. He sounded hesitant. He said he had been thinking about our conversation and wanted to tell me something without Mom in the room. For years, he said, there had been small moments when he noticed her retelling conversations differently. Not completely differently, just softer in one direction, harsher in another. He said he had sometimes corrected her privately. "Privately?" I asked. "Yes. Did you correct her with the person she told?" "Usually. No." There it was again. He told me one example from years earlier when Mom had described an argument with Emily as though Emily had screamed at her. Dad had been present and remembered Emily raising her voice, but not screaming. He told Mom afterward she was exaggerating. Mom said he was splitting hairs. Dad let it go. I asked why he was telling me now. Because I think I trained myself not to notice. That was more honest than anything he had said at the coffee shop. I told him noticing now did not erase what his silence had done. He said he understood. I was not sure he fully did. But for once I did not need to force the admission further. Before we hung up, I asked him not to forward me random memories or search through Mom's things. I did not want a secret campaign in my favor. If he had a message that involved me directly, and he believed I should see it, he could send it. Otherwise, I wanted him to do something much simpler. "What?" "Next time Mom tells you I said something, ask me." He said he would. I wanted to believe him. I also knew promises made during guilt were easy. The real test would come when asking me meant upsetting his wife. By the beginning of May, I had 3 verified examples: the birthday group chat, Dad's private message from Mom, and the police incident summary. That was enough to establish a pattern without turning every family memory into evidence. It was also enough to make me look back on things I had not thought about in years. One memory bothered me more than the rest. Aunt Marlene had been warm with me when I was younger, almost like a second mother. Somewhere in my 30s, that changed. She became polite, then cautious. I had assumed she disapproved of how little time I spent with my parents. After Thanksgiving 2025, she barely spoke to me at Christmas. For years, I had taken that distance as information. Now I wondered whose information it had been. I opened my messages with Marlene and scrolled back to the previous November. We had barely communicated directly. Most holiday plans had come through Mom. That fact alone was not proof of anything. But it gave me an idea I should have approached more carefully than I did. I wish I could say I was strategic from that point forward. I was not. I was angry. And anger has a way of disguising urgency as intelligence. I called Aunt Marlene. At first, I asked only about Thanksgiving. She confirmed Mom had told her I had chosen not to come. Then I asked whether Mom had ever told her other things about me that did not match what I had actually said. Marlene became uncomfortable almost immediately. I should have stopped there. Instead, I pushed. What else has she told you about me? Marlene said she did not want to get involved. You were already involved if she was telling you things about me. That's not fair, Sarah. Neither is spending years thinking I said things I never said. The conversation tightened. I could hear myself becoming more aggressive, but I kept going because for the first time I felt close to understanding how much damage had been done. I asked whether Mom had told her I was unstable. Whether she said I hated Emily. Whether she said I resented Dad. Whether she had been telling people for years that I was the difficult one. Marlene finally said, "You sound like you're trying to build a case against your own mother." That sentence should have warned me. Instead, I said, "Maybe I'm trying to find out what she built against me." We ended the call badly. Less than an hour later, Emily texted me. "Mom just called." I stared at the screen. Then another message came. "She knows you're going through old conversations." My stomach dropped. I had spent days being careful not to show Mom how much I had reconstructed, and in 20 angry minutes I had handed her the exact map. By dinner, Daniel had texted me asking whether I was okay. A family friend sent a vague message, saying she hoped I was taking care of myself. Then my phone rang with a cousin I had not spoken to in months. I did not answer, but the voicemail was enough. "Sarah, your mom says you've been going through years of messages and getting really worked up. I don't want to get in the middle, but maybe give yourself some space." I listened twice. Mom had moved faster than I expected. She was no longer defending the birthday. She was changing the subject. The question was no longer whether she had told different people different versions of events. The new question was whether I was becoming obsessed. For the first time since the screenshots arrived, I understood that having the truth and controlling how people encountered it were two different things. I had evidence. I also had anger. And in less than one afternoon, I had shown my mother exactly how to use the second one against the first. By the next morning, I had 3 messages from relatives I rarely heard from, and 2 from people who normally contacted me only around holidays. None of them accused me of anything directly. That was what made them so effective. "Hope you're taking care of yourself. Your mom is worried. Maybe step away from all this for a few days." Each message arrived dressed as concern, and every one of them carried the same implication. The problem was no longer what Mom had said or done. The problem was that I had started looking too closely at it. I recognized the strategy because I had helped make it possible. The day before, I had called Aunt Marlene angry and pushed far past the one question I could actually support. Instead of asking about Thanksgiving and stopping, I had asked what else Mom had told her about me, whether she had called me unstable, whether she had turned people against me for years. I had taken 3 verified examples and spoken as if they proved everything I feared. That was my mistake. Mom did not need to disprove the evidence after that. She only needed to tell people I was digging through old messages because I had become obsessed with proving she was against me. Brandon was already dressed for work when I came downstairs. He glanced at my phone on the counter and asked whether the messages had continued. I nodded and showed him one from Daniel. He had written, "I'm not getting involved, but your mom says you're going through conversations from years ago and taking everything out of context." Brandon read it, handed my phone back, and said, "That sounds like a sentence someone gave him." I agreed, but I was careful about what I said next. A week earlier, I might have announced that Mom had obviously coordinated the wording. Now I said, "It sounds similar to what other people are saying. I don't know whether she used the exact same words with all of them." That difference mattered. It was small, but I was beginning to understand how quickly certainty could become its own kind of distortion. Mom had spent years moving from fact to interpretation without telling anyone where the line was. I did not want to defeat that method by copying it. I opened the folder on my laptop and looked at what I actually had. The birthday evidence was strong. Mom's group chat message had a timestamp from before I arrived. Dad had sent me her private instruction to let everyone see what I was willing to do if I took the SUV. The clean title was in my name. The incident summary did not describe a confirmed theft. Those facts stood on their own. The older examples were narrower. Thanksgiving showed that Mom had told me not to come and later described my absence differently. Emily's move showed that Mom had told me I was not needed while telling Emily I had been too busy. The late fee conversation showed that a criticism of Dad's behavior had been retold as a judgment of his character. 3 cases were enough to establish a pattern worth questioning. They were not enough to justify declaring that every strained relationship in my life had been engineered by my mother. That was when the emotional part of it became harder than the evidence. I kept thinking about Thanksgiving. Not the dinner itself, because I had not been there, but what came after. Aunt Marlene had been noticeably cool with me at Christmas. Dad had told me I needed to make more of an effort. Emily had barely spoken to me. I had interpreted all of that as confirmation that they were disappointed in me because I had chosen not to show up. I never once asked whether they knew Mom had told me to stay home. Then I thought about Emily's move in 2024. We had been distant before that, but afterward she had stopped calling me for almost anything. I remembered thinking she was childish enough to punish me for being busy. She remembered thinking I had not cared enough to help. Neither of us had checked. Mom's 2 messages had been enough to keep the misunderstanding alive for nearly 2 years. That was the part I could not reduce to screenshots. There were relationships I had allowed to cool because I thought someone else had already decided I was not worth the effort. Some of them might have cooled anyway. Emily and I were genuinely different people. Dad really did avoid conflict. Aunt Marlene and I had grown apart for reasons that had nothing to do with one holiday. I was not interested in rewriting my entire life around a new villain, but I could no longer pretend the information we had been given had not shaped our choices. There were people I had stopped loving because I thought they had stopped loving me first. That realization hurt more than the birthday insult. Mom could tell me she wished I had never been her daughter, and I could leave. I could sell a car. I could stop answering calls. Those were actions with clean edges. But there was no way to recover years of conversations that never happened because 2 people had each been told the other one did not care. Emily called me that afternoon. She had received her own version of Mom's concern campaign. Mom had told her I was spiraling and trying to turn the family into witnesses against her. Emily sounded angrier than I expected. She asked me if you've been pressuring me to send screenshots. Have I? No. Then tell her that. I did. That answer surprised me. Emily said Mom had gone quiet for a second and then told her she was being manipulated because she was too emotional to see what Sarah is doing. I almost laughed at the symmetry. A week earlier, Mom had framed me as unstable. Now Emily was supposedly too emotional to know whether she was being manipulated. The common thread was simple. If either of us disagreed with Mom, our judgment became defective. Emily wanted to send me everything she had. I told her not to. That was partly self-protection. I did not want to turn her phone into an archive and spend nights searching for hidden meanings in every family text since 2018. More importantly, I had begun to realize that collecting more was not automatically the same as understanding more. Keep what you already have, I said. If there's something directly about me, send it. Otherwise, don't go hunting. She was quiet. You sound different from yesterday. I was an idiot yesterday. You weren't an idiot. I was angry enough to show Mom exactly what I was looking for. Emily did not argue with that. She admitted she had been tempted to call Mom and confront her about the moving day messages. I told her not to do it for my sake. If Emily wanted to ask Mom about something that affected Emily, that was her choice. But I was not going to use her as my messenger while criticizing Mom for doing exactly that. It was the first time I noticed how easy it would have been to become the new center of the same system. I had evidence. Emily was listening to me now. Dad was starting to question Mom's versions. If I wanted, I could have become the person who told everyone what everyone else should think. I could have built my own group chat, distributed screenshots, and turned every conversation into a referendum on Carol Donovan. The temptation was real. That frightened me more than I expected. I wanted Mom exposed. I wanted people to understand that I had not imagined the pattern. I wanted Aunt Marlene to feel embarrassed for assuming I had skipped Thanksgiving because I did not care. I wanted Dad to understand that his silence had consequences. I wanted Emily to finally see how often I had been framed as the difficult one. Wanting those things did not make me wrong, but wanting them gave me the ability to make stupid decisions while feeling righteous. So I set a rule for myself. I would not contact anyone simply to recruit them into my version. If someone came to me with a claim Mom had made about me, I would answer it directly. If someone had information about an event involving me and wanted to share it, I would listen. I would not chase people down asking them to search their phones for proof that Mom was terrible. That decision lasted less than a day before it was tested. Aunt Marlene called me Friday evening. I almost ignored it because our last conversation had ended badly. Then I answered, expecting another lecture about leaving the past alone. Instead, she said, "I think I owe you an apology." I did not make it easy for her. For what? For Thanksgiving, for one thing. She told me she had called Mom after our argument because she was worried. Mom had said I was going through years of texts, accusing her of manipulating the family and trying to get Emily and Dad to pick sides. Marlene admitted that at first she believed her. Then she went back to the Thanksgiving messages on her own phone. She found the conversation where Mom told her I had chosen not to come. Marlene remembered how angry she had been with me afterward. She also remembered that I had never personally said anything to her about the holiday. "I should have called you," she said. "Yes." She seemed surprised that I did not soften it. I continued. "And I shouldn't have called you yesterday, demanding a list of everything Mom ever said about me. That too." I almost smiled. It was the first conversation in days where neither person was pretending only one side had made a mistake. Marlene told me she did not want to be part of a campaign against her sister. I said I did not want one. She said she would not send me years of private messages. And I told her I was not asking. Then she said something more useful than any archive could have been. "If Carol tells me something you supposedly said from now on, I'm going to ask you." That was enough. After we hung up, I felt relief, but not victory. Marlene was still Mom's sister. She still loved her. She still believed some of Mom's complaints about me were probably justified. None of that bothered me as much as it would have a week earlier. I did not need everyone to decide Mom was evil. I needed people to stop treating her paraphrases as original sources. The counter-narrative continued anyway. Mom left one of the old family group chats over the weekend after posting that she was tired of being picked apart by people she loved. Before leaving, she wrote, "I'm not going to participate in Sarah's obsession with documenting every imperfect thing I've ever said." That sentence was clever because it made my evidence sound petty before anyone saw it. She was not denying the birthday timestamp. She was not explaining why she had told Emily and me different things. She was reframing the standard itself. If no mother could remember every sentence perfectly, then asking about contradictions became cruel. She also began telling relatives not to send me screenshots because it was feeding the problem. I learned that from Daniel, who called me Sunday afternoon and admitted Mom had asked him directly not to share the birthday group chat beyond what Emily already had. He sounded uncomfortable. "Are you asking me to send you stuff?" "No." "Okay. That's it? That's it." He laughed nervously. "Mom made it sound like you were collecting files on everybody." "I'm checking things that involve me. Those sound pretty similar." "They aren't." I explained the difference once. If Mom told Daniel something I supposedly said, and Daniel wanted to know whether it was true, he could ask me. I did not need his private conversations about things unrelated to me. Daniel said that sounded reasonable. Then he admitted he had believed Mom when she warned the family I might take the SUV because she made it sound as if I had already threatened to do it. "Did she ever show you a message where I said that?" "No." "Did you ask?" "No." There was nothing else to say. That became the most exhausting discovery of the month. Mom's power had not required elaborate deception. It required people who did not ask one additional question. I was one of them. That was the part I kept coming back to. It would have been emotionally easier to divide the family into manipulators and victims. Mom lied. Everyone else suffered. I discovered the truth. Clean, satisfying, false. Emily had believed ugly things about me because the role of good daughter benefited her. Dad had avoided verification because confronting Mom would have disturbed his peace. Marlene had accepted Mom's versions because sisters trust each other. I had believed Mom's descriptions of Emily because they confirmed what I already thought. The system had worked because every person inside it received something from not checking. That realization did not reduce Mom's responsibility. She was the one consistently passing altered versions between people. But it explained why the pattern had survived for so long without anyone needing to be stupid. By the second week of May, I stopped looking for older examples. I had enough. More importantly, I had learned that the strongest evidence was not volume. It was clarity. 3 old events. 1 birthday group chat. 1 private message from Mom to Dad. 1 police incident report. 1 clean title. That was the foundation. Everything else was interpretation. I printed a 1-page chronology and kept it in my desk drawer, not because I planned to wave it in anyone's face, but because I wanted to stop living inside a constantly changing story. When I felt angry enough to add a theory, I forced myself to label it as a theory. Mom wanted everyone to turn against me, was a theory. Mom told the group I might take the SUV before I arrived, was a fact. Dad has always chosen Mom over me, was too broad. Dad knew about the planned intervention and did not call me, was supported. That discipline helped until Mom changed tactics again. Instead of arguing about the birthday, she stopped mentioning it almost entirely. Her new language was concern. A family friend named Linda called me and said, "Your mother says you haven't been yourself." I asked, "What does that mean?" "She says you're going through old messages and upsetting yourself." "Did she tell you what I found?" Linda hesitated. "Not really." "Then what are you calling me about?" Another pause. "I guess I wanted to see if you were okay." "I'm angry. I'm sleeping. I'm working. Brandon and I are fine. I'm not in danger. If that's what you mean, I'm okay." Linda sounded relieved. She said she did not want to take sides. I told her she did not have to. That conversation repeated in slightly different forms over the next several days. Mom was not telling people I was a liar. That would have invited comparison of facts. She was telling them I was distressed, fixated, exhausted, hurt, not myself. All of those things were difficult to disprove because some were partly true. I was hurt. I was angry. I had been reading old messages. The trick was what those facts were being used to imply. If I objected too strongly, I looked defensive. If I ignored everyone, Mom could say I was isolating myself. If I sent screenshots unsolicited, I looked obsessed. For the first time, I understood why the birthday trap had worked so well. Mom rarely created situations where only one action served her. She created situations where nearly every reaction could be interpreted in her favor. The difference now was that I knew what I was looking at. I stopped trying to control what extended family believed. If someone contacted me, I answered their specific question. If they did not, I left them alone. That was harder than it sounds. There were evenings when I sat beside Brandon on the couch, imagining the conversations happening without me. Mom telling people I had changed. Relatives nodding. Someone repeating an old story. Someone else adding another. I wanted to interrupt rooms I was not in. Brandon could tell. One night he muted the television and said, "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Trying to argue with conversations you can't hear." I hated him for being right for about 5 seconds. Then I laughed. "I don't even know what she's saying." Exactly. That became another rule. I would not defend myself against accusations I had not actually received. It was a small rule. But it gave me back hours of my life. Emily was struggling more. Mom called her frequently, sometimes crying, sometimes furious. She told Emily that I was punishing her for one bad sentence on my birthday. Emily kept reminding her the issue was larger than that. Mom accused her of repeating my language. One evening, Emily called me after one of those conversations. She keeps asking what you're telling me. What are you telling her? That I'm talking to you directly. And? She hates that answer. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. I said, "You don't have to defend me to her. I know. You also don't have to report her conversations to me. I know." Neither of us hung up. Then Emily said, "This is weird." "What?" "Talking to you and not having to decide what to tell Mom afterward." That sentence explained more than she probably intended. For years, even our direct conversations had existed with Mom as an invisible third participant. What would she think? What would she hear? Which parts would reach her? Now Emily and I were trying to talk without automatically feeding the conversation back into the center. It was awkward. It was also the first thing that felt like progress. Dad made his own small attempt a few days later. He called me and said Mom wanted him to tell me that she deserved an apology for the way I had dragged family history into a birthday argument. I let him finish. Then I asked, "Do you agree?" He hesitated. "I think both of you have hurt each other." "That wasn't my question." "No," he said quietly. "I don't think you owe her an apology for checking the messages." "Then why are you delivering hers?" Another silence. "I guess I shouldn't be." "No, you shouldn't," he sighed. "She's going to be furious if I tell her I won't call you for her. That's between you and her." That sentence felt cruel for about half a second, then healthy. Dad had spent years making Mom's reaction everyone else's responsibility. If she would become angry when he refused to act as messenger, that was a problem inside their marriage, not a debt I owed him. He said he understood and ended the call. 20 minutes later, Mom called me directly. I did not answer. She left no voicemail. That was the first time in my adult life I could remember Dad refusing to carry one of her messages and Mom being forced to decide whether she wanted to speak for herself. It was a tiny change. It also told me more than another 10 screenshots could have. By mid-May, I could feel Mom losing control of the information flow. And I could also see how dangerous that made the situation. Her language grew broader. She stopped saying only that I was upset and started saying I was trying to divide the family. In one group thread, she wrote, "Everybody agrees this has gone too far." Aunt Marlene replied almost immediately, "Who is everybody?" I stared at the message and smiled despite myself. Mom did not answer the question. Instead, she wrote that she was tired of being interrogated and that family should not require written proof of every conversation. Dad did not respond. Emily did not respond. Daniel sent nothing. For years, everybody thinks had functioned like a verdict. Now, someone had asked for names. That was all it took to expose how empty the phrase could be. I did not join the thread. I wanted to. I had at least 3 things I could have posted. I could have dropped the birthday timestamp beneath Mom's complaint. I could have pasted the clean title. I could have embarrassed her in front of everyone she had tried to prepare against me. I did none of it. Not because I had become forgiving. I simply understood that Mom was trying to shift the fight from what happened to how aggressively I responded. I was not going to help her. A few days later, she made the next move herself. The invitation came by email. The subject line read, "Family meeting May 30. Mom wrote that too much damage had been done through texts, assumptions, and private conversations. She said everyone needed to sit in one room before this family is permanently broken." She invited Dad, Emily, Aunt Marlene, Daniel, Brandon, and me. I read it twice. Brandon looked over my shoulder. "You don't have to go." "I know. Do you want to?" I thought about the birthday dinner. Mom had created an audience before I knew there was a performance. This time she was announcing the stage in advance. That changed everything. I did not need to chase people individually anymore. I did not need to convince anyone through private calls. Mom was putting the same people who had received her version into one room. I could let her speak first. Then I could ask questions she had already answered differently in writing. I forwarded the invitation to the folder where I kept the chronology and closed my laptop. Brandon watched me. "What are you thinking?" "She thinks I'm going to show up angry." "Are you?" "Yes." He waited. "But that doesn't mean I have to act like it." For the first time since my birthday, I did not feel like I was reacting to whatever Mom did next. I knew exactly where she wanted me. And this time, I was going there on purpose. The invitation sat in my inbox for 3 days before I answered it. Not because I was undecided about going, but because I did not want Mom to learn anything from the speed of my response. She had spent weeks interpreting every choice I made as evidence of something larger. If I replied immediately, I was eager for a fight. If I refused, I was avoiding accountability. If I asked questions, I was controlling. So I waited until Thursday afternoon, opened the email, and wrote 4 words. Brandon and I will attend. No explanation, no conditions, no warning about what I planned to bring. Mom answered 11 minutes later. Thank you. I hope we can all come with open hearts instead of evidence folders. I stared at that sentence long enough to feel my pulse pick up. She did not know exactly what I had saved, but she knew enough to make documentation sound like a character flaw before I ever showed anyone a document. That was her strongest skill. She rarely needed to dispute a fact if she could make the act of presenting it look cruel. I forwarded her reply to Brandon. He called me from work and asked if I was okay. I said yes, which was mostly true. Then I admitted that part of me wanted to send the entire folder to everyone that afternoon and skip the meeting. I could attach the title, the police report, the group chat, Dad's message, Thanksgiving, Emily's move, everything. Brandon was quiet for a moment. Would everything in it be true? He asked. Yes. That wasn't what I was asking. I knew immediately what he meant, and I hated how quickly I knew. That night I wrote the post anyway. It was not for social media at first. It was a document titled For the Record. By the time I finished, it was nearly 6 pages long. I laid out the birthday chronology, Mom's message before dinner, the clean title, the police incident, the 2 versions of Thanksgiving, Emily's move, Dad's late fee conversation, and the way Mom had started telling people I was unstable once I began comparing old messages. Every sentence was accurate to the best of my knowledge. Every screenshot had a date. Every claim was tied to something I could actually show. Reading it should have made me feel calm. Instead, I felt satisfied. That was the part I had to pay attention to. I imagined Aunt Marlene opening it and realizing how easily she had believed Mom. I imagined Daniel reading the timestamp and feeling embarrassed. I imagined Mom knowing that the story had escaped her control. I imagined her community friends forwarding it to one another and asking why she had called the police over a car she did not own. I wanted the truth corrected. I also wanted her humiliated. Both things were true. When Brandon came home, I handed him the document without comment. He read it standing at the kitchen counter. About halfway through, he pulled out a chair. When he finished, he looked at me and said, "This is very good. That sounds ominous. It's factual. Also ominous." He smiled slightly, then asked, "Who are you sending it to?" "Everyone." "Which everyone?" I knew he was doing that deliberately. "Family." "Maybe the people she's been calling." "Do you know exactly who she's been calling?" "No." "Then you'd be sending evidence to people who may not have heard the accusation." I closed the laptop. Brandon did not tell me not to do it. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. He asked whether the goal was to correct false claims or make sure as many people as possible knew what Mom had done. "Both," I said. He nodded. "Then decide which one you want controlling the decision." I hated that answer because it required something more difficult than being right. I saved the document and did not send it. The following morning, Emily called before 8. Mom had contacted her again. This time, the message was more direct. According to Emily, Mom said, "Sarah is trying to make you choose between your family and her." Emily had called me instead of responding. "Are you?" she asked. It stung for half a second. Then I realized she was doing exactly what we had agreed to do. "No." "Are you asking me to stop talking to Mom?" "No." "Are you asking me to back you at the meeting?" "No." Emily exhaled. "Okay." I almost said, "You should know me better than that." Then I stopped myself. That sentence belonged to the same system we were trying to leave. Knowing someone was not a substitute for asking them. What did she actually ask you to do? I said. She wants me to explain at the meeting that you've been pressuring me. Have I? No. Then that's your answer. Emily was silent. What if she gets angry? That's between you and Mom. There was a time when I would have coached Emily on exactly what to say, when to say it, how to phrase it so Mom could not twist it. I could feel the instinct rising now. If Emily said the wrong thing, Mom might regain control of the room. If Emily softened too much, people might think I had exaggerated. It would have been easy to tell myself I was helping. I did not. You don't owe me a performance, I said. If you speak, say what you know. If you don't want to speak, don't. Emily laughed once. That's not what Mom said you'd tell me. I figured. That was another small victory I did not celebrate out loud. Mom had made a prediction about my behavior, and instead of waiting to see whether I fulfilled it, Emily had checked. A few days later, Dad called. He sounded exhausted. Mom wanted him to tell me that the family meeting was not a courtroom and that bringing documents would prove I had no interest in reconciliation. Do you agree with that? I asked. He paused. No. Then why are you calling me? I'm trying to keep things from getting worse. I let out a slow breath. Dad, we already did this. I know. Do you? Another pause. Then he surprised me. No, I guess I don't. I waited. He said Mom had been furious ever since he stopped carrying messages between us. She accused him of abandoning her when she needed him. He had tried explaining that she could call me herself. Mom said I would use anything she said against her. That sounds like a problem between the two of you, I said. I know. This time, he did not sound offended. I asked him one more question. Did Mom ask you to tell the group that I'm planning to embarrass her? Yes. Do you believe I am? I think you're going to bring evidence. That's not what I asked. He sighed. I don't know what you're planning. Good. He almost laughed. Before we hung up, Dad said something I did not expect. I'm not going to tell you what your mother thinks anymore unless she's standing there saying it herself. It was not an apology. It was more useful. The family thread became quieter as May 30th approached. Mom posted twice about wanting everyone to come in peace. Nobody responded to the first message. On the second, Daniel sent a thumbs up. Aunt Marlene said she hoped people would stick to what they personally knew instead of repeating what someone else had told them. Mom replied, That's exactly what I've been asking for. I almost admired the nerve. 3 days before the meeting, she posted again. I know emotions are high, but everybody agrees this cannot turn into an attack on one person. This time, Aunt Marlene answered before I could touch my phone. Who is everybody? There was a long gap. Then Mom wrote, I'm not going to argue semantics. Marlene replied, It isn't semantics if you're speaking for me. Emily sent nothing. Dad sent nothing. Daniel changed the subject. I sat on my couch watching that exchange unfold and realized something had changed before the meeting even started. Mom's old phrases depended on speed. Everybody thinks. Dad is upset, Emily says. She needed people to absorb the summary before they had time to ask who exactly had said what. Now, the question was appearing faster than the narrative. Who said that? When? Did they tell you directly? Those questions were not dramatic. They were devastating. That evening, I reopened the 6-page document and cut it down to 1. I removed every theory about Mom's motives. I removed words like manipulation, triangulation, smear, and control. I kept dates. April 18th, 5:58 p.m. Mom told the group I might take the SUV. Around 7:30 p.m., Mom told me to leave the keys. Around 7:35 p.m., she said she wished I had never been her daughter. Around 7:45 p.m., she demanded I return her SUV. Police incident. Registration returned to me. No theft arrest. Thanksgiving 2025. Mom told me not to come. Then told others I chose not to. August 2024. Mom told me Emily had enough help. Told Emily I was too busy. February 2025. I criticized Dad's late fees. Mom told him I considered him irresponsible. 1 page. No diagnosis. No declaration that Mom had ruined my life. Just contradictions. Brandon looked at it and nodded. That's harder to argue with. That's the idea. What if she refuses to talk about the dates? She probably will. What if she cries? She probably will. What if everyone feels sorry for her? Some of them probably will. He watched me. And they're allowed to. That answer surprised both of us. For weeks, I had imagined success as a moment when the whole room finally saw Mom exactly the way I did. By then, I understood that was another kind of control. I could show people what happened. I could not dictate what they felt afterward. My goal became smaller and stronger. I wanted one room where Mom could not say, "Sarah said," without me answering for myself. One room where she could not say, "Emily thinks," without Emily sitting there. One room where Dad could not hide behind, "Your mother told me." If everyone saw the evidence and still chose her version, at least the choice would finally be theirs. The night before the meeting, Mom called me directly for the first time in days. I answered because Dad had stopped carrying her messages, and I wanted to see whether she could speak without an intermediary. Her voice was controlled. "I need to know whether you're coming tomorrow to repair this family or punish me. I'm coming to talk about what happened." That isn't an answer. It's the only one I have. She said she knew I had been collecting material. I told her I had saved messages that involved me. She accused me of treating family like a vendor dispute. For a moment, the insult landed because it hit the exact insecurity I had been wrestling with. Maybe I was too clinical. Maybe the way I organized facts made me cold. Maybe families required more grace than contracts. Then I remembered the birthday group chat. Grace did not require pretending a timestamp said something else. "Do you want me to come tomorrow?" I asked. She paused. "Yes, then I'll be there. Without trying to humiliate me, I can promise I won't lie about you." "That's not what I asked." "I know." She hung up. I sat in the dark living room for a few minutes afterward. I was angry. I was nervous. I was looking forward to parts of the confrontation more than I wanted to admit. None of those emotions changed the facts. Brandon came downstairs and found me sliding the one-page chronology into a plain folder with copies of the title, the police incident summary, the birthday group chat screenshot, and Dad's message. "You sure?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded toward the folder. "That all you're bringing?" "That's enough." I had no hidden recording device. No secret attorney. No plan to live stream anything. Emily had not rehearsed a speech. Dad had not promised to take my side. Aunt Marlene still loved her sister. Daniel still wanted everyone to stop fighting. Mom had the room she wanted. She had the audience she had chosen. She had spent weeks telling them I was angry, obsessive, and determined to make her look bad. For the first time since my birthday, I did not need to stop her from telling that story. I only needed to let her finish it, while everyone who could contradict her was sitting in the same room. "She thinks tomorrow is her stage," I told Brandon. He looked at me. "And?" I closed the folder. "I'm going to let her use it." By the time Brandon and I pulled into my parents' driveway on May 30th, I had read the one-page chronology so many times I could have recited it without looking. That was exactly why I left it inside the folder on my lap until we were inside. I did not want to walk in holding paperwork like a prosecutor. Mom had invited everyone to clear the air, and I wanted her to have the first word. Dad opened the door before we knocked. He looked tired, but he did not whisper advice or ask me to go easy on Mom. That alone told me the last month had changed something. Aunt Marlene was already in the living room with Daniel. Emily sat on the far end of the couch, one leg bouncing. Mom had arranged the chairs in a loose circle and placed a box of tissues on the coffee table as if she had already decided what kind of meeting this would be. She hugged Brandon and did not try to hug me. "Thank you for coming," she said, with the careful calm she used whenever she wanted everyone else to notice how reasonable she was being. I sat beside Brandon. Dad took the chair nearest Mom. Emily stayed where she was. Nobody touched the coffee or cookies Mom had put out. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the ceiling fan and the faint hum of traffic outside. Then Mom folded her hands in her lap and began. We're here because this family cannot keep living like this." She looked around the room before letting her eyes settle on me. She said the past 6 weeks had been painful for everyone. She said private conversations had been dragged into public arguments. Old mistakes were being treated like evidence of malicious intent, and people were being forced to choose sides. She said she understood I was hurt by what she had said on my birthday, and regretted that one sentence spoken in anger had become bigger than the years of love surrounding it. She did not mention calling the police. She did not mention the group chat. She did not mention that she had warned everyone I might take the SUV before I arrived. I let her finish. That seemed to unsettle her more than interruption would have. After several minutes, she finally asked, "Sarah, do you have anything you want to say?" "I have questions." Her mouth tightened slightly. "Of course you do." I did not react to the tone. "On my birthday, what time did I tell you I was taking the SUV that night?" Mom blinked. "This is exactly what I mean. You're reducing a family crisis to timestamps." "What time?" She glanced at Dad, then back at me. "At dinner. When you announced you were taking it." I opened my folder. Mom exhaled loudly. "There it is." I took out one page, not the whole stack. "At 5:58 that afternoon, before I arrived, you wrote in the group chat, 'Sarah may try to take my SUV tonight. If she causes a scene, don't argue with her.' I got to the house more than an hour later. I had never told you I was taking the SUV that night, so I'm asking again, how did you know?" Mom's expression changed, but only for a second. Then she leaned back. "Because I know my daughter. That isn't a timestamp. I didn't need one. You had been threatening to take the car for months. I said Brandon and I planned to sell it in the summer, which meant taking it away from me. Eventually." She looked at the others. "You see what I mean? Every word has to be dissected." I kept my eyes on her. "You told everyone I might do something before I had decided to do it. Then you brought up the exact subject Aunt Marlene had told you not to bring up." Marlene shifted in her chair. Mom turned toward her. "I didn't plan a fight," Marlene said quietly. "You did tell me you weren't going to bring up the SUV." Mom's shoulders stiffened. "Because I wasn't planning to." Sarah made it an issue. I almost laughed, but I did not need to. Emily spoke before I could. "You told her to leave your keys." Mom looked at her. "Because she was leaving in my vehicle." I took the title copy out of the folder and placed it on the coffee table. "It was never your vehicle." Mom stared at the paper without picking it up. I put the incident summary beside it. "The clean title is in my name. No transfer, no lien. The registration is in my name. The police report does not say you owned the SUV, and nobody arrested me for theft." Mom's face reddened. "I never said you were arrested. You told people police came because I stole your car. You took the car I had been using for almost 2 years after a fight. That is true. Calling it theft is not." Dad rubbed his forehead but did not tell me to stop. Mom looked at him. "Edward, are you really going to sit there and let her do this?" Dad hesitated. That was the old opening. Mom presented a conflict. Dad softened it. And I became the person creating discomfort. This time he said, "She's asking about what happened." Mom stared at him as though he had broken a rule. Then she shifted tactics. "Sarah, you are clearly very upset." "I am. You've spent weeks going through old messages. You've called relatives. You've made Emily question everything. Do you hear yourself?" "Yes." "Does that sound healthy to you?" I could feel anger rising, but I knew exactly where that road led. "It sounds like I checked what people told me. You're obsessed with proving I'm some kind of monster." "I haven't called you a monster. You don't have to use the word." There it was again. The move from what I had done to what she believed it meant. I said, "Then let's stay with what I actually did." Mom shook her head. "This family is not one of your supplier disputes." "No. Suppliers usually give me records when I ask." Daniel coughed into his hand, trying to hide a reaction. "Brandon touched my knee once, not to stop me. Just to remind me he was there." Mom looked wounded. "After everything we've done for you, this is what I get." I could have listed every bill I had paid, every holiday I attended, every time I had helped. I did not. What does that have to do with the timestamp? She looked at me like she could not believe I was refusing the guilt she had offered. Everything doesn't have to be a courtroom, Sarah. Then answer, without treating it like one. She said nothing. I took out Dad's screenshot. Mom sent Dad this before dinner. If Sarah takes the car, don't chase her. Let everyone see what she's willing to do. Dad, did she send you that? Dad looked at Mom, then at me. Yes. Did I ever tell you I planned to take the car that night? No. Did Mom tell you the dinner was supposed to teach me something? Dad's voice was low. She said you needed to understand how your behavior was affecting the family. Mom cut in. Because you did. I did not look away from Dad. Did you know she would call the police? No. Did you know she would say she wished I'd never been her daughter? No. I nodded. That's what I thought. Mom immediately seized on it. So even your father is telling you there was no plan? No. He's telling me he didn't know how far you would take it. Her expression hardened. I turned to Marlene. Thanksgiving last year. What were you told about why I wasn't there? Marlene looked miserable, but she answered. Carol told me you decided not to come. I took out my phone and read the message Mom had sent me 2 days before Thanksgiving. Don't worry about coming. We're keeping it small this year. Mom threw up her hands. Plans change. They did, but you never told me they changed. You could have called. I could have, so could you. That stopped her for a moment. I did not bring out Emily's moving day texts or the late fee conversation. I had promised myself I would not bury the room in evidence. 3 contradictions were enough. The birthday prediction, Dad's private message, Thanksgiving. Mom looked around at everyone as if expecting someone to rescue her. You all know Sarah. You know how she gets when she thinks she's right. Nobody answered. Then she looked directly at Emily. Emily knows what you're really like. The room changed. Emily's foot stopped bouncing. Mom continued. She's lived with your criticism her whole life. She knows how controlling you can be. She knows you pressure people until they agree with you. Emily stood. Don't speak for me. It was not loud. That made it stronger. Mom stared at her. Excuse me? I said don't speak for me. I'm defending you. I didn't ask you to. Mom blinked several times. Emily, this is exactly what Sarah has been doing. She's gotten inside your head. No, Sarah asked me questions. You don't understand how she manipulates people. Emily's face tightened. Then let me decide that. Mom looked genuinely disoriented. For years, she had used Emily as proof. If I was difficult, Emily was sensitive. If I was cold, Emily was loving. If I was controlling, Emily needed protection. Now the person she was protecting had stepped out of the role. Mom lowered her voice. Honey, I'm your mother. I know. You're going to regret letting her come between us. Emily shook her head. She isn't between us right now. You are. Dad looked down. Marlene stared at Mom. For the first time all afternoon, Mom seemed to have no prepared direction. I did not step into the silence. I wanted to. A part of me wanted to use that moment to finish everything, to pull out every screenshot and force every admission. But the room was already doing something more important than anything I could have said. People were beginning to speak for themselves. Dad finally lifted his head. Carol, you told me that birthday dinner would make Sarah understand what she was doing? Mom turned on him. Because I was trying to help this family. You also told me not to stop her if she took the car. I was upset. That was before she arrived. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. Marlene spoke next. You told me Sarah chose not to come for Thanksgiving. Oh, for God's sake, we are still talking about Thanksgiving? Yes, Marlene said. Because I was angry with her for months. Mom looked at her sister with open frustration. I probably remembered it differently. Then say you remembered it differently. Don't tell me what she decided when you don't know. Mom's hands tightened in her lap. Do none of you understand what I have been trying to do? No one answered. Her voice rose, not into screaming, but into something raw. Someone had to keep this family together. I felt the sentence land harder than the denial ever had. By keeping us apart? I asked. That is not what I did. You told me what Emily thought. You told Emily what I thought. You told Dad what I supposedly meant. You told everyone what I might do before I arrived. Because none of you talk to each other unless I make it happen. Emily said, "We're talking now." Mom looked at her sharply. Then she said the sentence I would remember longer than anything else from that meeting. "You don't understand what this family is like when I'm not managing it." The room went still. She probably did not hear it as a confession. I did not think she meant it as one. To her, managing us was love. Predicting us was responsibility. Translating us was keeping peace. But sitting there, with Dad's silence no longer covering her, and Emily refusing to be spoken for, I finally understood why direct communication had frightened her so much. If we asked each other what we meant, we did not need her to tell us. I closed the folder. Mom looked at it. "Is that it?" "For me, yes. That's all you have to say after humiliating me in my own house? I asked you questions in a meeting you called. You came prepared to make me look like a liar." "No. I came prepared in case you changed what happened." Her face hardened again, but I was done. Brandon and I stood. Emily stayed behind, as did Dad and Marlene. I did not ask anyone to leave with me. That mattered. I was not replacing Mom as the person who decided where everyone belonged. Before I reached the door, Mom said, "You're going to regret what you've done to this family." I turned back. "No. I think we're finally going to find out what's left when everyone speaks for themselves." Brandon and I drove home in silence for the first 10 minutes. I was exhausted, but lighter in a way I did not trust yet. Nothing had been repaired. Dad had not suddenly become brave. Emily and I were not healed. Marlene still loved her sister. Mom had not apologized. But one thing had changed permanently. She had tried concern. She had tried guilt. She had tried Dad. She had tried Emily. And none of them had carried her version for her. I thought that was the consequence. I was wrong. At 10:14 that night, an email from Mom landed in my inbox. I was one of many visible recipients. Extended family. Family friends. Several names I recognized from the neighborhood charitable committee she helped organize. The subject line was simple. "Since Sarah has chosen to make this public." I opened it. The first paragraph said, I had taken her car. Forced police involvement, manipulated Emily, turned Dad against her, and spent weeks trying to destroy her reputation. Brandon read over my shoulder. I reached the last line and felt something inside me go completely still. Mom had been given a room full of facts and one final chance to stop rewriting them. Instead, she had decided to find a bigger audience. I read Mom's email twice before I answered anything. The first time, I read it like a daughter. The second time, I read it like someone checking a document for claims that could actually be verified. That distinction saved me from sending the 6-page response I had written weeks earlier. Mom's message went to everyone in the visible recipient list. Aunt Marlene, Daniel, several relatives, 2 family friends, and 4 people I recognized from the neighborhood charitable committee where she handled volunteer communications. She said I had taken her car after a family argument, forced police involvement, pressured Emily into turning against her, and pushed Dad into choosing sides. She ended by saying she would not allow one angry daughter to destroy decades of family relationships and community trust. If she had sent that only to family, I might have let it sit for a day. The moment she included people from the committee, she changed the problem herself. Brandon stood beside me while I copied the recipient names into a separate list. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I told him I was going to answer exactly what she had sent and nothing else. I did not need to tell her committee friends about Thanksgiving, Emily's move, or Dad's late fees unless those facts became relevant. Mom had made 4 claims in that email. I only needed to address 4 claims. The next morning, I created a 1-page chronology. I attached a copy of the clean title, showing the SUV was mine, the relevant registration page, and the police incident summary. I included the screenshot from the birthday group chat showing Mom had predicted I might take the SUV before I arrived. Emily agreed to write 3 sentences of her own. Her statement said I had not asked her to cut contact with Mom, had not pressured her to choose sides, and had not told her what to say at the family meeting. That was all. Dad did not write a statement, and I did not ask him to. If he wanted to speak for himself, he could. My email was shorter than Mom's. I wrote that Carol had circulated several factual statements about me that were incorrect, and that I was responding only to the people included in her original message. I said the SUV had never been legally transferred to her. No theft arrest had occurred. Emily's statement spoke for itself, and I had not asked Edward Donovan to choose between his wife and his daughters. I attached the documents and ended with one sentence. I am not asking anyone to take sides. I am asking that statements attributed to me be checked with me directly. My finger hovered over. Send longer than I expected. I still wanted it to hurt. That was the truth. I wanted Mom to open the attachments and understand that the version she had just expanded to a larger audience could no longer float free of records. I wanted the people she had copied to compare her language with the title and the incident report. I wanted her embarrassed. But I also knew I had limited the response to exactly the people she had already pulled in. I was not posting anything publicly. I was not sending it to neighbors who had never heard the accusation. I was not forwarding it to her friends just because I knew their names. I sent it. For almost 4 hours, nothing happened. That silence was harder than the family meeting because I could not see anyone's face. I went to work, answered calls, reviewed contracts, and checked my personal inbox more often than I should have. Around noon, Aunt Marlene replied only to me. Thank you for keeping this factual. Daniel sent a shorter message. I didn't know the title was still in your name. Neither response was an apology, and I did not ask for one. Then a woman named Susan Hart called me. I knew her name from Mom's committee, but we had met only twice. She identified herself as one of the volunteers copied on the email, and immediately said she did not want to become part of a family dispute. I told her I did not want that either. That's why I'm calling, she said. Carol made it sound as if the committee was somehow being dragged into this because people were attacking her publicly. I've never contacted the committee. I figured that out. She asked whether I had any problem with Mom continuing her volunteer role. I told her that was not my decision and not something I intended to pursue. She sounded relieved. Then she asked something I had not expected. Did the police actually confirm you stole the vehicle? No, that's what Carol told us. I looked at the copy of the incident summary on my desk. I sent the same document you received. That's all I can tell you. Susan said she appreciated that and ended the call. I did not tell Brandon about it until that evening, because I did not want to start imagining consequences before anything had actually happened. He listened, then said, You know she's probably going to call Susan now. I know. Are you going to call anyone else? No. That answer came easily. For once, I did not feel compelled to get ahead of Mom. She did exactly what Brandon predicted. 2 days later, Susan forwarded me an email Mom had sent to several committee members. I knew it existed only because Susan chose to send it to me. I had not been copied on the original. Mom wrote that the incident report was incomplete, that police had still responded because I had taken a vehicle she considered hers, and that I was using technical ownership to justify emotional abuse. She said people outside the family could not understand the full history of Sarah's behavior. That phrase almost impressed me. Whenever a document contradicted the story, the full history became the place where the real truth supposedly lived. One volunteer replied to Mom asking a straightforward question. Did police tell you Sarah stole the car, or is that your interpretation of what happened? Susan forwarded that response too. Mom answered that the distinction was insulting and that the volunteer was taking Sarah's side. I closed the email. There it was. The same move. A question about facts became a declaration of loyalty. What had worked inside the family did not work as smoothly with people who had not spent decades learning to avoid upsetting her. I did not reply to Susan's forwarded thread. I thanked her for letting me know and said I had nothing else to add. Mom called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. She did not leave one. Emily called 20 minutes later. Mom wants me to retract my statement. Do you want to? No. Then don't. She says I made her look like a liar. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Did you lie? No. Then I don't know what you want me to tell you. Emily sighed. I don't want you to tell me anything. I think I just needed to hear how simple it sounds when you say it. It isn't simple when she's crying. No. And it isn't simple when she's your mother. No. But your statement was 3 sentences. Emily laughed, despite herself. I know. That was becoming our most useful habit. We stopped turning each other's choices into moral philosophies. Emily had written 3 factual sentences. Mom disliked their effect. That did not make the sentences wrong. Dad's situation was harder. A week after the email, he called and told me Mom had drafted what she called a joint family clarification. She wanted him to sign it. The statement said the birthday incident had been exaggerated. The SUV had always been treated as Mom's. Police involvement was the result of a misunderstanding, and the family remained united, despite Sarah's current anger. Did you sign it? I asked. No. Why not? Because it isn't true. I let that sit for a moment. What did Mom say? That I'm humiliating her. Are you going to sign it? No. There was a steadiness in his answer that had not been there a month earlier. I did not congratulate him. He should have been capable of refusing a false statement all along. But I also did not minimize the fact that, for him, this was new. He said Mom had accused him of siding with me because he was afraid I would cut him off. I asked whether that was why he refused. No, he said. I refused because I was there. That answer mattered more than an apology. In the following days, Mom's communication with extended family became less frequent. Not because she had accepted anything, but because every broad claim now created the possibility that someone would ask for specifics. Aunt Marlene called Emily directly about a comment Mom attributed to her. Daniel called Dad instead of asking Mom what Dad thought. A cousin wrote in the family thread, "If anyone has an issue with me, please ask me directly." Mom replied with a heart emoji. The irony was almost beautiful. The committee issue moved more slowly, exactly as it should have. Nobody held an emergency tribunal. Nobody fired Mom from a job because it was not a job. She was a volunteer communications coordinator for a neighborhood charitable group that organized donation drives, meal deliveries, and seasonal fundraisers. Her role depended mostly on trust, organization, and access to the group's email lists. What I knew came through messages other people voluntarily showed me. Susan sent one more email near the middle of June. The committee chair had asked Mom to stop using volunteer mailing relationships for personal family issues and to keep committee communications limited to committee business. Mom responded that she had never used an official mailing list and that the people she contacted were also her friends. That may have been technically true. I did not know whether she had exported any list or simply knew the addresses herself. I was careful not to claim more than I could prove. The problem for the committee was no longer whether she had violated a specific database rule. It was judgment. She had copied committee volunteers into a family accusation, then attacked one of them for asking a factual question. A week later, I heard nothing. Then Dad called. He did not sound good. Your mother was asked to step back from the committee. I sat down, asked how. The chair emailed her. From the whole organization? No, from communications. For now. That sounded proportional and believable. What reason did they give? Dad said the chair wrote that personal conflicts had begun affecting trust among volunteers, and that someone else would handle communications for upcoming events. I did not ask Dad to forward the email. He offered. I said no. That surprised him. Don't you want proof? I believe you're reading it. A month earlier, I would have wanted the document immediately. This time, the consequence did not need to become another exhibit unless Mom later lied about what happened. Dad was quiet. Then he said, "She's devastated." I believed that. Mom had been doing community work for years. She liked being the person everyone called when a family needed meals after surgery or volunteers had to be organized for a donation drive. Some of that generosity was real. I did not need to pretend every good thing she had done was manipulation just because I finally understood how controlling she could be inside our family. Losing the communications role hurt because it touched the identity she valued most. The woman who kept everyone connected. The woman people trusted to know who needed what. the woman who organized everyone else. Now a group outside the family had told her, politely, that they no longer trusted her to be the person controlling the messages. I felt satisfaction. I also felt sad. Both were true. Dad asked if I would call her. No, Sarah. If she wants to talk to me, she can call me. She thinks you caused this. I didn't send her email. I know. I didn't tell her to copy committee people. I know. I didn't answer Susan for her. I know. Then don't ask me to fix it. He went quiet. I wasn't asking you to fix it. You were about to. Another pause. Maybe. At least he was getting better at hearing himself. Emily took Mom's loss harder than I expected. She called me that night and said Mom had been crying for hours. Emily felt guilty because her 3-sentence statement had been included in my correction email. Do you wish you hadn't written it? I asked. No. Then what are you guilty about? That she's hurting. You're allowed to care that she's hurting, and still not retract it? Yes. Emily was silent for a while. I used to think those two things couldn't exist together. So did I. That was one of the most difficult lessons of the entire spring. Boundaries had always been explained to us as punishment. If you loved someone, you protected them. If you let them suffer consequences, you were cruel. Mom had taught us that so thoroughly that even now, when the consequence came directly from something she had chosen to send, both of us still felt the old instinct to rescue her. I did not. By the end of June, the practical consequences had settled into place. Mom no longer handled committee communications. Dad refused to sign statements for her. Emily continued talking to me directly. Aunt Marlene stopped accepting secondhand reports without checking. Some relatives thought I had gone too far. Some thought Mom had. Several refused to take a side at all. That was fine. I had never needed unanimous agreement. What mattered was that Mom could no longer say everyone thinks and expect the sentence to close the discussion. I thought she might eventually retreat, at least for a while. Instead, on the first Monday in July, my phone rang just after 6 in the evening. Mom's name appeared on the screen. I almost let it go. Then I remembered what I had told Dad. If she wanted to speak to me, she could call me herself. I answered. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Mom said, very quietly, "Are you happy now?" Mom's voice was so quiet that for a second I wondered whether I had heard her correctly. There was no anger in it yet, no accusation, just exhaustion, which somehow made the question harder to answer than if she had been shouting. I was standing in the kitchen with one hand on the counter, watching Brandon carry groceries in from the garage. He glanced at me when he saw my face, but I shook my head slightly to let him know I was fine. I could have given Mom the answer she probably expected. No, of course not. I could have told her I hated what had happened, that I wished none of it had gone this far, that losing her committee role had never been my goal. All of that would have been true. It would also have been incomplete. So I told her the truth. Part of me is. The silence on the other end changed. When Mom spoke again, the exhaustion was gone. I knew it. No, you didn't. I knew you wanted this. I wanted you to stop telling people things that weren't true. You wanted to humiliate me. I wanted you to stop. And now I've lost something I've worked on for years. I leaned against the counter. You sent that email because you forced me to defend myself. I didn't force you to copy committee people. They were my friends. Then you chose to bring your friends into it. You knew exactly what would happen when you sent those documents. I did know there would be consequences. I had not known exactly what they would be, but pretending otherwise would have been dishonest. I knew people would see the facts you had left out. That's the same thing. No, it isn't. Mom exhaled sharply. You always do this. You make everything sound so clean when you're the one hurting people. For years, that accusation would have pulled me into a defense of my intentions. I would have explained how much I cared. I would have listed everything I had done for the family. I would have tried to prove I was not cold. This time I asked, "What are you actually asking me to do?" She went quiet. That was when I understood why she had called. She had not called to know whether I felt guilty. She wanted something. Finally, she said, "You could tell them this got out of hand. The committee? The committee. The family. Everyone. What do you want me to tell them?" That none of this was meant to become some public scandal. It isn't public. You know what I mean. No, I don't. Be specific. I heard her breathing change. She hated specificity when it removed the space she used to reshape things. You could tell them the situation was emotional, that there were misunderstandings, that I never intended to accuse you of stealing anything in a legal sense. I closed my eyes. There it was. A new version. Not that she had called police about a stolen vehicle. Not that she had kept calling it her car. Now it had been an emotional misunderstanding that everyone else had interpreted too literally. You want me to tell them something I don't believe. I want you to stop destroying me over one mistake. It wasn't one mistake. Here we go. No. I'm not going through everything again. Then stop punishing me. I felt anger rise, but it was cleaner now than it had been in May. I was not searching for the perfect sentence that would finally make her understand. I had stopped believing there was one. I didn't ask them to remove you from anything, I said. I didn't contact your committee. I didn't tell anyone to stop trusting you. I corrected what you sent about me. You knew they would judge me. Yes. Her breath caught, as if the honesty surprised her. And you were fine with that. I was fine with them deciding what they thought after seeing the same information. That's not what family does. I almost smiled, not because anything was funny, but because I finally recognized the trap before stepping into it. What does family do, Mom? Family protects each other. From what? From being destroyed over their worst moment. I let that sit. There were times in my life when she had protected me. Real times. Not invented after the fact. When I was 13 and had a fever that would not break, she slept on the floor beside my bed because she was afraid I would get worse in the night. When I was 26 and lost a job I had been certain would become my career, she drove nearly 3 hours with 2 containers of food and sat at my kitchen table while I cried. She did not tell me to toughen up. She did not compare me to Emily. She just stayed. When Brandon and I got married, there was a quiet moment before the ceremony when Mom fixed the back of my dress and looked at me in the mirror. She had tears in her eyes. "You look happy," she said. "I am. Then that's enough for me." I remembered believing her completely. Those memories were real. So was the birthday group chat. So was the police call. So was the email. For weeks, some part of me had wanted the past to resolve into one clean answer. Either Mom had loved me or she had manipulated me. Either she had been a good mother or a harmful one. I was beginning to understand that adulthood sometimes meant accepting 2 truths that refused to cancel each other out. She had loved me in ways I could remember. She had also hurt me in ways I could prove. One did not erase the other. I opened my eyes. Family also shouldn't create the worst moment and then demand protection from the consequences. That is not what happened. Then we still disagree. You always have to win. That sentence used to infuriate me because it made every boundary sound competitive. This time it mostly made me tired. I'm not asking you to agree with me. You want everyone else to. No. I want them to stop repeating things about me without asking me. That's splitting hairs. It's the entire problem. Mom's voice softened suddenly. "Sarah, I'm your mother." There it was. Not an argument. A rank. A role she believed should change the rules. I looked toward the living room. Brandon had put the groceries away and disappeared upstairs, giving me privacy without being asked. Then you should have known better than anyone what those lies would cost. Mom did not answer. For several seconds, I could hear a television in the background at her house. Dad was probably somewhere nearby. Months earlier, I would have wondered whether he was listening, whether Mom would repeat the call accurately, whether he would call me afterward with her version. Now I did not care. If Dad wanted to know what I said, he could ask me. Mom finally whispered, "You think I lied to you your whole life." I didn't say that. "You think everything I did was manipulation." I didn't say that either. That's what you're implying. No, that's what you're hearing. She became angry again. You're impossible to talk to. Because I won't defend things I didn't say. Because you twist everything. I almost reminded her how ironic that accusation was. I did not. Instead, I said, "I remember good things." That stopped her. "What?" "I remember you taking care of me when I was sick." I remember you driving to see me after I lost that job. I remember things you did that mattered to me." She did not speak. "I'm not erasing those things." Her voice cracked slightly. "Then how can you do this?" Because that was the part she still could not understand. In her mind, gratitude was permanent leverage. If she had loved me, helped me, raised me, then anything I did that exposed her later became betrayal. I answered carefully, "Because good memories don't make the other things untrue." That's a cruel way to look at your mother. It's an adult way to look at another person. She went silent again. I was not trying to hurt her with that. It was simply the clearest sentence I had. Mom had spent years using family roles as shields. Mother meant protector. Daughter meant loyalty. Father meant peacekeeper. Emily meant sensitive. Sarah meant difficult. Once those roles were assigned, actual behavior could be interpreted to preserve them. I was done with that. "You don't get erased because you hurt me," I said. "But what you did doesn't disappear because you were good to me other times." Her voice was colder when she replied, "So what now? You just throw me away?" I had expected that question eventually. "No." She sounded surprised. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not doing this the old way anymore." "What old way?" "You telling me what Dad thinks. You telling Emily what I think. You telling Marlene what I meant. You saying everybody agrees, and expecting me to defend myself against people who never spoke to me. So you're cutting me off." "No. You just said you're not doing this anymore." "I'm not cutting you off. I'm setting one rule." I heard her breathing, slow and suspicious. "When you can talk to me without telling me what everyone else supposedly thinks, you can call me." "That's ridiculous." "It's simple. What if your father has something he wants me to tell you?" "He can call me." "What if Emily says something about you?" "She can call me." "What if someone is hurt by something you've done?" "They can tell me." "You expect everyone to communicate like strangers." "No, I expect adults to communicate like adults." Mom laughed bitterly. "You've become so cold." There was a time when that would have cut deep, not because I believed it, but because I feared it. I had spent years worrying that independence had made me hard. That saying no too often had turned me into exactly the daughter Mom described. Now I knew something she did not. Coldness was not refusing to carry messages. Coldness was not asking for direct communication. Coldness was not letting someone experience consequences. I did not need to defend myself from that label anymore. Maybe that's how it looks to you. You don't even care what I think. I care. I'm just not letting what you think define what everyone else thinks too. Mom's breathing grew ragged. For a moment, I thought she might cry. When she spoke again, her voice was small. "I don't know what happened to us." That hurt. Not because I did not know the answer. Because part of me remembered a time when I would have done anything to repair that sentence. I said, "I think we stopped talking to each other and started talking through everyone else." That's not fair. Maybe not, but that's what I'm changing. She did not say goodbye. She ended the call. I stood in the kitchen holding my phone for several seconds after the screen went dark. I did not feel victorious. I felt grief. That surprised me because I had imagined confrontation as relief. I thought once I finally said everything clearly, some knot inside me would loosen. Instead, I felt the weight of knowing Mom might never become the person I needed her to be. And I had decided I could live with that. Brandon came downstairs a few minutes later. He did not ask what Mom said. He asked, "How are you?" I leaned against him, tired. He wrapped an arm around me. "Did you tell her you're done?" "No." He waited. "I told her she can call me when she can talk to me without using everybody else." That sounds harder than being done. It is. Cutting someone off entirely could have turned Mom into a closed door. My boundary left a door open, but only if she walked through it without carrying an audience behind her. That was harder for both of us. Over the next week, I heard very little from her directly. Dad called twice. The first time, he told me Mom was still angry about the committee. He caught himself halfway through the sentence and stopped. "I'm doing it again," he said. "Yes." He laughed quietly. I was about to explain how she feels. I noticed. "I'm sorry." That was progress. The second call was different. Dad wanted to talk about his own relationship with me, not Mom's. He asked if we could meet for lunch the following week. I said yes. Then he said, "I know you probably don't trust me much right now." That's true. He did not argue. I'd like to fix that. I told him fixing it would take time. I know. Again, he did not argue. Emily was moving differently too. She called me sometimes without any crisis attached. The conversations were awkward at first. We had spent so many years speaking mainly when Mom told one of us there was a problem that ordinary conversation felt almost unnatural. One Saturday, she called to ask whether I knew a good place to have a laptop repaired. I gave her the name of a shop near her apartment. Then we talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. Afterward, I realized Mom's name had never come up. It was one of the strangest victories of the entire summer. Emily still saw Mom regularly. Dad still lived with her. Aunt Marlene still spoke to her every week. I did not ask any of them to stop. That was essential. If I had made their relationships with Mom a test of loyalty to me, I would have rebuilt the same system with myself in the center. I wanted out of the center. By mid-July, I was ready to deal with the SUV. It had been sitting in our driveway since my birthday. At first, I kept it because I did not want Mom using it while ownership was being argued. Then, it became evidence. After the family meeting and the email exchange, there was no reason to keep it. The title was clean. No lien. No ownership dispute on paper. I told Brandon I was going to sell it. He asked whether I wanted to offer it to Dad. No. Emily? No. Why? Because I don't want the car to become another family decision. That was the truth. If Dad bought it, Mom might still use it. If Emily bought it, Mom might call it something Sarah took from her and gave to Emily. If I sold it to someone outside the family, the story ended. I cleaned the interior, collected maintenance records, took photographs, and listed it at a fair market price. The process was boring. I loved that. After months of hearing the SUV discussed like a symbol of loyalty, abandonment, cruelty, entitlement, and motherhood, it was deeply satisfying to reduce it back to mileage, condition, service history, and price. A vehicle. Nothing more. Before the first buyer came to see it, Emily sent me a text. Mom says Dad wants us there Sunday. I stared at the message. A few months earlier, I would have reacted to the content. Why does Dad want us there? What happened? Is Mom trying another meeting? Instead, I looked at the source. Mom says. I typed one sentence. Did Dad tell you that? Emily's reply came almost immediately. No. I did not answer anything else. 10 minutes later, she texted again. I called him. Then another message appeared. He doesn't. I smiled at the screen. Emily added. Mom made it sound like he did. I typed, "Good thing you asked." She replied with a laughing emoji. That should have been a tiny moment. Instead, it felt like proof. The system had depended on speed. Someone told us what another person meant, and we reacted before checking. Now Emily had stopped between statement and reaction. She had asked. Nothing exploded. No one was punished. Dad answered his own question. Mom's version simply failed to become reality. That evening, I sat on the porch while Brandon finished washing the SUV, before another potential buyer came the following weekend. The sky was still bright, even though it was after 7. Summer had settled over Columbus, warm and heavy. Brandon dropped the hose and sat beside me. You okay? Yes. You smiled at your phone earlier. Emily checked with Dad. That sounds like a very low bar. It is. He smiled. Still counts. I watched water run down the driveway. For most of my life, I had thought family closeness meant knowing each other without needing to ask. Mom had turned that idea into a weapon. I know you meant facts were unnecessary. I know how she is meant verification was rude. I know what Dad thinks meant Dad did not need to speak. Maybe closeness was not knowing without asking. Maybe it was being willing to ask even when you thought you already knew. I did not know whether Mom would ever accept that. I no longer needed her to. A few days later, Dad called me himself. Not through Mom. Not because she was upset. Not to tell me what anyone else wanted. He asked if I was still free for the lunch we had discussed. Yes. Good. Then he hesitated. Your mother said. He stopped. I waited. Dad laughed softly. Never mind. If she wants you to know, she can tell you. I smiled. Exactly. After we hung up, I looked through the kitchen window at the SUV sitting outside. I knew selling it would not fix my family. It would not erase the birthday. It would not make Mom apologize. It would not give Emily and me back the years we had spent believing the worst versions of each other. But, for the first time, I did not need one action to do all of those things. Some problems did not need a dramatic solution. Sometimes the smartest decision was simply to stop giving the problem another way back in. Dad chose a diner halfway between our houses for lunch the following Tuesday. It was one of those old suburban places that had probably looked the same for 20 years, with vinyl booths, laminated menus, and coffee poured before anyone asked for it. He had always liked places like that because they made conversation easier. There was something comforting to him about sitting somewhere ordinary, somewhere no one expected anything dramatic to happen. When I walked in, he was already in a booth by the window with a mug in front of him. 4 months earlier, seeing him there early would have made me wonder what Mom had told him before I arrived, whether he was angry, disappointed, or prepared to deliver another message on her behalf. That afternoon, I did something simpler. I looked at his face and waited for him to tell me himself. He stood when I reached the table and seemed unsure whether to hug me. I made the decision for both of us and stepped forward. His arms closed around me carefully, not with the old, automatic familiarity, but with the caution of someone who understood that closeness had become something he could no longer assume. We sat down. For the first minute or two, he talked about traffic and asked whether Brandon was still planning to repaint our deck before fall. I answered normally. I could tell he was building toward something, but I did not help him get there faster. One of the habits I had spent the summer breaking was rescuing other people from the discomfort of saying what they actually meant. Finally, Dad wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and said, I've been thinking about what I owe you. I expected an apology. Instead, he surprised me. Not money, he continued. Not some big explanation. I think I owe you an answer. I waited. For years, your mother would tell me something you supposedly said, and I'd decide how I felt before I ever talked to you. He looked embarrassed, which was different from looking guilty. Guilt can still be about the person feeling it. Embarrassment meant he was finally looking at his own behavior from the outside. She'd say you thought I was careless, he said, or that you were angry about something I'd done, or that you didn't want to come over. Sometimes she was probably right. Sometimes she wasn't. But I didn't check. No, I said, you didn't. He nodded, instead of defending himself. And then I'd call you after I was already upset, usually to tell me to apologize. I know. The waitress appeared with menus, and Dad smiled at her automatically. We ordered sandwiches we had both eaten there before. When she walked away, he looked down at the table. I kept telling myself I was staying out of things, he said. I wasn't. That was the closest he had come to saying it without softening the edges. What were you doing? I asked. He took a breath. Choosing the version that caused me the least trouble. Least trouble with who? His eyes came up to mine. Your mother. There it was. Not the family. Not everybody. Mom. For years, Dad had described himself as a peacekeeper caught between difficult people. The word peace made his choices sound noble. What he had really protected was his own ability to live beside Mom without challenging her. If that meant Emily resented me over a moving day I had been told not to attend, he could live with it. If it meant I believed he was hurt by words I had never said, he could live with that too. Those conflicts happened at a distance from him. Challenging Mom would have happened inside his own house. He said, I know that doesn't excuse it. No, I also think I liked being the reasonable one. That made me look at him more closely. He gave a small, tired smile. Your mother was emotional. You were stubborn. Emily was sensitive. I got to be the calm person in the middle. The calm person who didn't actually stop anything. Yes, I appreciated that he did not flinch from the wording. For most of my adult life, conversations with Dad had eventually turned into discussions of intent. He never meant to hurt anyone. He hated conflict. He only wanted everybody to get along. I did not doubt those things anymore. They just no longer erased the effect of what he chose. Dad said, "I should have called you before your birthday." I let him continue. "I knew enough to know your mother wanted that dinner to make a point. I knew she had talked to everyone in the group. I knew she was worried about the SUV. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. It was your daughter's birthday. I know. You were in the group chat. I know. You saw her predicting what I might do before I even got there. I know. And you saw that message she sent you about letting everyone see what I was willing to do." He nodded. "I should have called you." "Yes. I'm sorry." It was the first apology from him that did not contain a qualifier. "No, your mother was upset too. No, you both made mistakes." Just an apology attached to something specific he had done. I believed him. I did not tell him everything was fine. "I appreciate that," I said. "Trust is going to take longer." I figured. Dad asked what rebuilding trust would look like. I told him I did not have a 10-step answer. That would have been easier for me. I liked systems. I liked rules. I liked knowing what measurable success looked like. But relationships did not always need to become procedures, simply because uncertainty made me uncomfortable. "For now," I said, "if you want to know what I think, call me." He nodded. "If Mom tells you I said something, I ask you." "If Emily tells you I said something, I ask you." He almost smiled. "I'm noticing a pattern. It really isn't complicated." "No," he said. Apparently that was the problem. The waitress brought our food, and for the next half hour we talked about things that would once have felt too unimportant for a father-daughter conversation. Dad's tomatoes were growing badly because he had planted them too close to the fence. Brandon had ordered the wrong amount of stain for the deck, and now had enough to cover half the neighborhood. My office had changed software systems, and everyone hated the new one. Dad told me about a neighbor who had spent 3 weekends trying to repair his own lawnmower before finally buying another one. At some point, I realized we had been talking for 20 minutes without mentioning Mom. That should not have felt remarkable. It did. Before we left, Dad told me he planned to call again the following week. He did not say Mom wanted us all to get together. He did not ask whether I could reconsider the committee situation. He did not carry a message. Just, "I'll call you." I said, "Okay." That was enough. Emily and I had to learn ordinary conversation too. A couple of weeks later, she asked if I wanted to meet for lunch near her office. My first reaction was suspicion. What happened? What did Mom say? What problem needed solving? Then I realized Emily had not mentioned a problem. So I went. We met at a sandwich place with terrible parking and good fries. Emily complained about someone at work who answered every email with, "Per my previous message," and I told her that phrase was corporate code for, "I hate you politely." She laughed. We talked about her apartment, the chair she had finally replaced after nearly a year of threatening to throw it away, and a new supervisor at her office who insisted on scheduling meetings at 8 in the morning. For 20 minutes, nothing important happened. I learned more about Emily in those 20 minutes than Mom had told me about her in months. That was when Emily's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and frowned. "What?" I asked. She hesitated, then turned the phone toward me. Mom had written, "Your sister told Dad I'm not allowed to know about their lunches now." Emily looked at me. "Did you?" "No." That was it. No indignation. No history lesson. No speech about how Mom was doing it again. Emily typed, "Sarah says she didn't. Did Dad tell you that?" Mom answered less than a minute later. "That isn't the point." Emily and I looked at each other. Then we both laughed. It was not funny that Mom was still doing it. What was funny was how visible the mechanism had become. Mom had been given 2 simple questions. Had I said it? Had Dad told her I had? She answered neither. Months earlier, Emily would have spent half the afternoon trying to decide what Mom meant by, "That isn't the point." I would have spent the other half defending myself against a claim that had never been sourced. Now we could see the empty space where the evidence should have been. Emily put her phone face down. "I used to lose hours to this." "So did I. What do you do now?" "If someone can answer a direct question and they don't, that tells me something." She nodded slowly. Then she looked at me and asked, Do you still think I'm spoiled? The question was so unexpected that I nearly choked on my drink. Sometimes. Emily laughed. Fair. You still think I'm controlling? Sometimes. Also fair. There was something strangely freeing about that conversation. Mom had not created every problem between us. Emily could be impulsive. I could be rigid. She sometimes avoided responsibility until the last possible moment. I sometimes decided there was one correct way to handle something and became impatient with anyone who disagreed. Those differences were real. For years, though, every real difference had been filtered through a system that turned irritation into identity. Emily was not just impulsive. She was irresponsible. I was not just organized. I was controlling. Emily was not just emotional. She was fragile. I was not just independent. I was cold. Once those labels existed, every new disagreement became proof of them. We did not need to pretend we liked everything about each other to stop living inside those categories. Before we left, Emily started telling me Mom was still angry about the committee. She got halfway through the sentence and stopped herself. Sorry, I'm doing it. You're not. She looked confused. You can tell me what Mom said to you if it affected you, I explained. Just don't turn it into what Mom thinks I'm supposed to do. Emily thought about that. So talking about someone isn't the problem. No, speaking for them is. Exactly. That distinction was important because I did not want direct communication to become another rigid family law where nobody could ever discuss someone who was not in the room. People talk, families vent. Friends ask for advice. The problem had never been conversation itself. The problem was authority. Mom's version had always arrived as if it were the original source. Dad thinks. Emily wants. Marlene said. Everybody agrees. I no longer accepted those sentences without checking where they came from. By late July, the consequences for Mom had stopped looking dramatic and started looking permanent. She was no longer the volunteer communications coordinator for the neighborhood charitable committee. Another woman handled emails, donation schedules, and volunteer reminders. Mom still attended some events. She still helped set up tables and sort donations. Some people still liked her. Some probably thought the whole situation was unfair. Nobody expelled her from the neighborhood. Nobody publicly denounced her. Nobody posted her messages online. Life simply reorganized around the fact that she was no longer the person controlling communication. I think that hurt her more than a dramatic public punishment would have. The first time I understood that was when Aunt Marlene called me after a food drive. She mentioned casually that Susan had coordinated the volunteers and everything went smoothly. I said, "That's good." Marlene paused. Carol was there. I figured. She helped with setup. That's good too. Another pause. You're not going to ask how she handled it? No. Why? If Mom wants to tell me how she feels about it, she can. Marlene laughed softly. You really are sticking to this. Yes. The old me would have wanted every detail. Did Mom look embarrassed? Did Susan avoid her? Did volunteers whisper? Did anyone mention the email? I would have justified the questions as information gathering. But information gathering can become another way of keeping someone at the center of your attention. I did not want Mom at the center of my life anymore, even as an enemy. That was one of the hardest things to understand about revenge. There was a version of revenge that would have required me to keep watching her forever. I would have needed updates on every consequence, every uncomfortable conversation, every person who stopped trusting her. I would have measured my healing by whether she continued suffering. That would still have made my life revolve around her. I wanted something better than victory. I wanted distance from the scoreboard. Some relatives told me directly that they thought I had gone too far. One cousin said the police report should never have been sent outside the family. I reminded her that I had kept it private until Mom sent accusations to people outside the family. I know, she said. I still would have handled it differently. That's okay. She sounded surprised. You're not going to argue? No. You don't care what I think. I care. I just don't need you to agree with me. That was new for me. Mom had taught me one kind of control, but I had my own vulnerability to another. I liked being right. I liked facts arranged in order. I liked conclusions that could be defended. At work, that was useful. In family life, it could become exhausting. People were allowed to see the same event and feel differently. My job was not to force them toward my emotional conclusion. My responsibility was narrower. If someone repeated a factual claim about me, I corrected it. If they still thought I had been too harsh afterward, that opinion belonged to them. I did not need to cross-examine feelings. The SUV sold on August 8th. I had listed it in late July, cleaned the interior, gathered the maintenance records, and set a price based on comparable vehicles in the area. The first 2 buyers wasted my time. One wanted me to knock several $1,000s off before seeing the car. Another stopped replying after asking 27 questions about the tires. Then a man named Kevin contacted me. He came on a Saturday morning with his wife. They had a teenage son who was about to start driving, so they planned to give him their older sedan and wanted something larger for themselves. Kevin walked around the SUV, checked the body panels, looked under the hood, reviewed the service history, and asked sensible questions. Any transmission problems? No. Major accidents? No. Title clean? Yes. I showed him. He checked the VIN. No family history. No morale argument. No discussion of who deserved the vehicle. He drove it around the neighborhood, returned, and offered a little below my asking price. I countered. We settled a few $100s apart from where we started. Then we completed the paperwork. I signed the title. Kevin paid. His wife asked where the nearest gas station was. That was it. The entire transaction took less than an hour. It was almost aggressively boring. I loved every second. For months, the SUV had been transformed into something larger than a machine. To Mom, it had become proof of what she believed she was owed. To the family, it had become a symbol of whether I was generous or selfish. To the police call, it became alleged stolen property. To me, for a while, it became evidence. But standing there while Kevin adjusted the driver's seat, I saw it for what it had always been. A 6-year-old SUV with decent mileage and a clean title. He waved through the windshield and drove away. I watched until he turned at the end of the street. Brandon came up beside me. You going to miss it? The car? Yes. No. What about everything it represented? That's exactly what I'm not going to miss. He laughed. We went inside, and he opened 2 beers, even though it was barely noon. To Kevin. I lifted mine. To Kevin. Later that afternoon, I transferred the sale proceeds into the long-term savings account Brandon and I shared. I did not use the money for a dramatic vacation. I did not buy something extravagant as a symbol of freedom. I did not give part of it to Emily or Dad. There was no family discussion about it. The money from my asset went where Brandon and I decided it should go. That ordinary decision felt more satisfying than any theatrical gesture could have. By the middle of August, Dad was calling once or twice a week. Sometimes the calls lasted 5 minutes. Sometimes we talked for nearly an hour. He told me about his garden, a problem with the dishwasher, an old friend who had moved to Arizona. I told him about work, and whatever Brandon and I were doing that weekend. He slipped occasionally. Your mother says... Then he would stop. Once he laughed at himself. Still doing it. You caught it. I'm getting faster. He was. I did not pretend that made everything repaired. Trust returned in small pieces. 1 phone call, 1 direct question, 1 refusal to carry a message. There was no ceremony for it. Emily and I were similar. Some weeks we talked twice. Other weeks we barely texted. I had once believed closeness had to mean constant contact. Now I understood that a relationship could be healthy even if it was not intense. Emily did not have to become my best friend to become my sister again. Mom and I spoke only occasionally. She never gave me the apology I once imagined I needed. She did not admit she had manipulated the birthday. She did not say she understood what she had done between Emily and me. She did not confess that she needed to control everyone. I stopped waiting for those sentences. Sometimes she called and talked normally for 10 minutes. Other times, the old language appeared. A lot of people think, I would ask, who? Sometimes she named someone. When she did, I could decide whether I wanted to call them. Other times, she changed the sentence. I just mean people are worried. Which people? Forget it. That was fine. The point was never to force her to become someone else. The point was to stop letting vague authority control me. The strangest change was how little drama existed once people stopped carrying messages automatically. Mom could still be angry. She could still believe I had humiliated her. She could tell Aunt Marlene privately that I was cold. She could tell Dad she thought I had changed. But those opinions no longer traveled through the family as facts, unless someone chose to repeat them. That pipeline had broken. On August 25th, a little more than 4 months after my birthday, I was sitting at the same kitchen table where I had first built the chronology when my phone buzzed. I had a contract open on my laptop and a mug of coffee beside me. Brandon was upstairs on a work call. Mom's name appeared on the screen. It was a text. "Everybody thinks you've taken this too far." I stared at the sentence. 6 words. Months earlier, they could have ruined my evening. I would have immediately started constructing the invisible jury. Dad? Emily? Marlena? Daniel? Susan? The committee? Family friends? I would have imagined conversations I had never heard and defended myself against opinions nobody had expressed directly. That was the old system. Mom did not need to name people. Everybody did the work. I looked at the message for another few seconds. Then I opened the family group thread. Dad was there. Emily. Aunt Marlene. Daniel. Mom. I typed one question. Who is everybody? I sent it. The typing indicator appeared under Mom's name, then disappeared. It appeared again, disappeared again. Nobody else answered. Dad did not jump in to explain that Mom meant people were worried. Emily did not text me privately saying Mom had been crying. Aunt Marlene did not tell me to let it go. Daniel did not change the subject. The thread simply sat there. For nearly 2 minutes, nothing happened. Then Mom wrote, "Never mind." I looked at those 2 words and felt something I had not expected. Not triumph. Not anger. Peace. I put my phone face down. Brandon came downstairs a few minutes later carrying his laptop. "Everything okay?" "Yes." "What happened?" I thought about how complicated the answer could have been. Mom tried again. Nobody backed her. The system failed. Instead, I said, "Nothing." And for once, nothing was exactly what had happened. No argument, no police, no family meeting, no 6-page document, no apology demanded, no audience assembled. Mom made a claim. I asked for the source. There wasn't one. The claim died where it was. That was the ending I had not known I wanted. For most of my life, I thought Mom held our family together because she knew everyone better than anyone else. She knew who was upset, who needed money, who had been hurt, who wanted an apology, who was too stubborn to call. What I understand now is that knowing people and speaking for them are not the same thing. A parent can know a child deeply and still be wrong about what that child means. A sister can know your history and still misunderstand your intentions. A husband can love you and still need you to tell him what you need. Closeness is not mind reading. Closeness is being willing to ask. I also learned something less comfortable about myself. I had spent years believing independence put me outside Mom's system. It did not. Every time she told me Emily was selfish and I thought, of course she is, I participated. Every time she told me Dad was hurt and I decided not to call him because I already knew how he was, I participated. Every time I walked away from a conflict and assumed facts would eventually speak for themselves, I left an empty space where someone else could speak for me. That does not make me responsible for Mom's choices. It does make me responsible for what I do with the pattern now that I can see it. If Emily is angry with me, I ask Emily. If Dad wants something, he calls me. If Aunt Marlene thinks I handled something badly, she is free to say so. If Brandon thinks I am being too rigid, he does not need Mom or anyone else to translate that for him. And if Mom tells me everybody agrees, I ask her to name everybody. Sometimes she can. Often she cannot. Our family did not become perfect. That would have been another lie. Dad and I were rebuilding trust. But there were moments when I remembered how many times he had chosen silence and felt angry all over again. Emily and I had recovered some closeness, but there were years between us that we could not get back. Mom and I could talk, but there were subjects we still approached carefully. Some relatives believed I had done the right thing. Some believed I had been too harsh. A few probably believed both. The difference was that those opinions belonged to the people who held them now. They were no longer packaged together as, what the family thinks. That mattered. Mom once told me someone had to manage the family, or everything would fall apart. For a while, I believed exposing her would be the thing that destroyed us. It wasn't. The family did not collapse when she stopped being the person in the middle. What collapsed was the shortcut. We could no longer ask Mom what Emily meant. We could no longer ask Dad what Mom wanted. We could no longer assume silence meant agreement. We had to speak, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes badly, sometimes later than we should have, but directly. I used to think revenge would feel like watching Mom lose something. Her credibility, the SUV, her committee role, the authority to say everybody and have the room go quiet. There was satisfaction in those consequences. I would be lying if I denied that. When she asked whether I was happy, part of me was the most honest answer I could give. But that satisfaction was not what lasted. What lasted was the freedom of no longer needing to win every version of the story. Mom could tell herself I had changed. She could tell herself Emily had been manipulated. She could believe Dad had abandoned her. She could believe the committee had overreacted. I did not have to enter every room where those beliefs existed and correct them. I only had to protect the part of the story that belonged to me. That was smaller than revenge. It was also stronger. The night of my 40th birthday, my mother said she sometimes wished I had never been her daughter. For weeks afterward, I thought those words were the deepest wound she had given me. They were not. The deeper wound was realizing how many years I had let other people tell me who my own family was. The healing did not come when Mom finally suffered consequences. It came when I stopped accepting secondhand relationships. I had spent decades thinking a strong family was one where everyone stayed connected. Now I think a strong family is one where connection does not require someone standing in the middle controlling the wires. Mom is still my mother. Dad is still my father. Emily is still my sister. Brandon is still the person who reminds me that being right and being wise are not always the same thing. And I am still stubborn, organized, occasionally too certain of my own conclusions, and much more comfortable with facts than emotional ambiguity. None of that had to disappear for me to make one better choice. Ask the person. That was all. When someone tells you what another person supposedly thinks of you, ask them. When someone says everyone agrees, ask who. When someone tells you silence means rejection, check whether the other person was ever given the chance to speak. When someone claims they are keeping the family together, look carefully at whether they are actually keeping everyone connected to each other or merely connected through them. Those questions would not have saved every relationship in my family. They would have saved some. I cannot change that now. What I can do is make sure nobody gets to write the next 10 years for us simply because they speak first. That evening, after Mom's "never mind," Brandon and I ate dinner on the back patio. The weather was warm, the deck still only half stained because Brandon had underestimated how long the job would take, and a mosquito kept circling his beer. Nothing meaningful happened. Dad did not call. Emily did not send screenshots. Mom did not create another emergency. We talked about whether we should finish the deck before Labor Day. At one point, Brandon looked at me and said, "You're quiet." "I'm good." "You sure?" "Yes." He believed me. Not because he knew me so well that asking was unnecessary. Because he had asked. I smiled. 4 months earlier, 3 police vehicles had been sitting outside my parents' house. Because Mom believed she could turn my decision into proof of the person she had already told everyone I was. Now there was no SUV in my driveway. No file open on my laptop. No audience waiting for a verdict. Just my husband sitting across from me, my family learning how to speak in their own voices, and a phone that could ring without controlling my life. I had wanted Mom to regret what she did. She did. But by the end, her regret was no longer the most important thing. Mine was simpler. I regretted how long I had confused distance with independence, silence with strength, and someone else's certainty with truth. I could not undo those years. I could make the next choice differently, and that was enough. When family members speak for each other, you can lose years to assumptions nobody checks. Protect yourself by asking people directly, keeping records, and refusing to reward manipulation with silence. You can love family without surrendering your judgment. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about choosing clarity and self-respect.